This man chanted a spell for the very first time, and the world's top S-rank assassin went pale instantly. The reason was simple. All he used was the most basic necromancy. Yet in a single moment, he summoned 11 skeleton warriors that shrugged off every attack. The sight of it left the assassin frozen, unable to believe his eyes. Even the necromancer hiding in the shadows felt a chill run down his spine. What they didn't know was that in his past life, this man had been the strongest necromancer alive. But in the final battle against the Holy Sword Knight, his heart was pierced by his enemy's blade, and he died where he stood. At that moment, Archimonde, the strongest necromancer, was covered in wounds and already on the brink of collapse. Looking back on the 10-year war that had swept across the continent, he still failed to withstand the Allied forces' surprise assault. He was utterly crushed by their attack and suffered a catastrophic defeat. And the one at the center of it all was the twin-sword knight, Belker Reinhardt. Standing before Archimonde, he said, pushing you this far cost the lives of countless comrades. For the peace of the continent, stop now, Archimonde. Silence. When everyone turned a blind eye to the plague, you were no different. And now you dare speak to me of peace. Are all you paladins this hypocritical? The moment those words fell, the necromantic power inside Archimonde exploded, and blue-green ghost flames wrapped around his entire body, radiating pure killing intent. Shock spread across everyone's faces, and no one could believe he could still cast magic in that condition. The others immediately urged Belker to strike, but he raised a hand and stopped them. He brought up the people who died in the plague, revealing that Archimonde had turned them into his undead army. That single atrocity was what made him the target of the crusade. Don't make me laugh. You think I don't know? Your hometown and your family died in that plague too. You came here for revenge. So stop dressing yourself up in justice and lying to yourself. At that moment, Belker tightened his grip on the holy sword. For the children's future, you have to die. My choices, my faith, and my hope, I have to leave them behind for the children. Hearing those words, a flash of shock crossed Archimonde's blood-covered face. For the first time, he saw the shining resolve of a true knight in Belker's eyes, and realized that, in everyone else's eyes, he had become no different from a demon. At that moment, Belker raised the holy sword high, ready to deliver the final blow. Archimonde, any last words? A necromancer doesn't die that easily. Just wait for my return. The moment those words fell, the holy sword came crashing down on Archimonde. Before his consciousness faded, he swore he would make this pack of hypocrites pay. In the end, the blade fell, blood spread, and he could clearly feel his life slipping away. He even heard the sound of his own head hitting the ground. At the same time, thunder tore through the rainy night, and Archimonde's consciousness sank into endless darkness with it. Two maids were overjoyed to discover that their sickly young master had actually moved his lips. Archimonde was completely stunned. He had really been reborn as a baby. And a group of young women were gathered around him, trying to coax him into calling them mama. In a moment of panic, he blurted out a necromancy spell, scaring the maids so badly that they froze on the spot. The spell triggered a violent surge of magic, and in an instant, fierce winds and rolling thunder filled the entire room. In the blink of an eye, 15 years passed. In the square, a group of girls watched the boy walking by and couldn't help exclaiming, "Wow, he's so handsome." The boy had silver white hair, a cold and elegant aura, and features so perfect they looked carved by a god. And yes, this boy was none other than the reborn Archimonde, now known as Klein. Even the maids along the way couldn't help staring in admiration when they saw Klein's face. Suddenly, the Holy Knight Garrison appeared and splashed wine and holy water on Klein, shouting that he was going to purify an evil spirit. He claimed he could see Archimonde's shadow on Klein's face. The scene terrified the maids and threw them into instant panic. Klein was genuinely speechless, feeling like this was just another ridiculous purification farce. Garrison stubbornly insisted that Archimonde's soul was attached to Klein and demanded to purify him by force. No matter how desperately Klein denied it, he still ended up drenched in holy water. "I've seriously had enough. Have you completely lost your mind?" Hearing that, Garrison immediately ordered his men to seize Klein. He even wanted to strip him by force and carry out a purification ritual by bathing him in holy water. At that moment, as Klein ran, flashes of his previous life being killed kept surfacing in his mind. Remembering how he had been beheaded, only to be reborn inside a baby's body, and because of that one incantation, ended up locked in the monastery for years. Inside the monastery, he met Garrison, who called himself a knight of the Holy Church. The moment the man saw him, he called out Archimonde's name on the spot. That was when Klein realized the real nightmare had only just begun. From then on, he was forced to endure a full set of purification torture. Daily scripture recitals and freezing garlic baths never stopped for a single day. Even the purification flame ritual, which simulated being burned at the stake, left him physically and mentally drained. 5 years passed, and Klein's daily life was nothing but endless purification torture. The maid Aaron prayed for him in silence the entire time, hoping only that he could live safely and grow up healthy. And after enduring Garrison's non-stop chanting, Klein was pushed to the brink and angrily tore the hat off his head. Only when he saw Erin's disappointed expression did he realize she had made it for him, and he instantly felt a little guilty. Just as Klein bent down to pick up the hat, Erin said it had actually been made by Garrison, making him freeze on the spot. The moment he turned around, he met Garrison's cold and sinister gaze. All he heard was, "Archimonde's evil soul has surfaced again. Prepare for purification." At that moment, Dunkel, captain of the Red Chariot Knights, arrived. Dunkel said, "The rumor that Klein is a demon has been around for 10 years already. It's time to put a stop to this." Hearing that, Garrison turned and replied, We'll stop here for today. We'll continue next time." Even though he clearly restrained himself in front of Dunkel, when it came to Klein, he was still as domineering as ever. The second he said that, Garrison turned and walked away. And before leaving, he didn't forget to remind them that the next purification would be on Friday. Klein couldn't help cursing inwardly, "Damn old man. Is this guy even really a priest? He's more like a devil than any devil. So no, there's no way I can admit who I am. If I do, who knows what kind of torture he'll come up with next." Looking at Klein, Dunkel said, "He's an agent. You know that too, and I believe he has his reasons for acting this way. Besides, no one knows the true identity or background of church agents. But I heard Garrison is one of the church's top agents, and the only person who can keep him in check is the Duke." After hearing that, Erin's eyes filled with admiration, while Klein could only look helpless and irritably scratch his hair. Then Erin asked, "Who was the strongest Duke in the family's history?" The moment he heard that, Klein's expression darkened immediately. Even father, the current Duke, is nowhere near as terrifying as the first Duke. Dunkel clearly hadn't expected such a shocking answer from him. Klein stared at the portrait of the first Duke. To others, it looked like admiration, but his feelings were far more complicated than that. Seeing Klein's reaction, Dunkel was also surprised that he could stand before the portrait for so long without looking away. The first Duke founded this family, and by now it had a history of 200 years. At that moment, Klein finally had no choice but to accept reality. He had been reborn into the family of his past life's greatest enemy. Portraits of the Dukes across the generations passed one by one before his eyes. At last, his gaze stopped on the portrait of the first Duke. The face of the first Duke, Belker, was crystal clear in Klein's mind, and he was the very man who had killed him. In his memory, the words Belker shouted before his death. That line, "for the children's future," had remained tangled in his heart ever since. Scenes from that battlefield instantly came rushing back, and the image of Belker swinging his sword and cutting off his head resurfaced once again. Suddenly, Klein jolted awake from the nightmare. "Damn it, this dream again. My name is Archimonde, a legendary necromancer. I was reborn with all the memories of my previous life. Yet even now, I still can't fully get used to this face and this hair." Suddenly, Garrison appeared. "So you talk in your sleep, huh, young Master Klein? Did you dream again about your glorious days as Archimonde?" Just as Klein was getting ready to play dumb and brush it off, Erin suddenly rushed out. "Archimonde, I order you to destroy the continent and kill every last one of them." Just then, the butler walked over and reported that the swordsmanship demonstration was about to begin. But Garrison said, "First, young Master Klein needs to undergo double purification." Hearing that, Klein ranted inwardly. What the hell is that even supposed to mean? Does he really have to be this insane? Not long afterward, Klein still went to attend the swordsmanship demonstration. He couldn't help wondering why his father had suddenly called him there. Erin ran over to ask him for something to eat, and the butler immediately opened his mouth to scold her. "All right, old man, seriously, can't you be a little gentler with a child? Look at her, doesn't that little girl look happy enough just eating?" At that moment, Klein asked the butler, "Why did father call me here for the first time?" "Young master, it is because relatives from a branch family have come to visit." After hearing that, Klein fell silent, because he knew very well what kind of people that group really was. The moment they arrived, the branch relatives started mocking him on sight. "Hey, don't just call him Klein. You should call him Lord Archimonde." The people mocking Klein were all cousins from his mother's side, and every word out of their mouths dripped with contempt and ridicule. As Klein listened to them, all he felt was irritation. Suddenly, someone from the branch family declared that someone like Klein shouldn't exist in the family at all, and even accused him of having no manners because he hadn't greeted them first. Klein kept a cold expression and looked straight at them all. "You bunch of idiots, I can't even remember the names of branch family nobodies like you, okay?" Just then, the sword duel between the two people in the arena had already reached an intense stage. One of them was completely overwhelmed in the exchange and forced back step by step. The one getting pushed back was furious, and swallowing that humiliation, he insisted on deciding the final winner with his opponent. The fighter with the upper hand said directly, "This match is already over. There's no need to continue." But the losing side was full of resentment and had no intention of admitting defeat so easily. At that moment, Klein quietly watched the man fighting in the arena. He was one of the few truly gifted young members of the family. This genius was none other than Klein's half-brother Delern, who had long upheld the family's reputation as a house of swordsmanship through his own strength. Suddenly, the losing man gritted his teeth and gathered power, clearly waiting for a chance to launch a sneak attack and turn things around. Through this match, Klein saw the standard of top-tier swordsmanship with his own eyes for the first time. The very next second, he activated his special ability. The power to see through both fighters' footwork, opening moves, and even the flow of mana running through their bodies. The moment the match in the arena ended, Klein rubbed his aching eyes and turned to leave. But just as he turned around, a voice stopped him. "So it really was you, little brother. If I'd known you were here, I would have taken it more seriously. You did well already, Delern, but I need to head back first." Suddenly, an irritating voice rang out. "A member of the Klein family who can't even use a sword is nothing but trash. Isn't he just acting superior because he's from the direct line? How pathetic." Klein turned to look at him. Dutton Conwell, a guy who clawed his way up from a subordinate branch just to chase rich women. "You think you're qualified to talk about me?" Hearing that, Dalton instantly flew into a rage, clenched his fist, and swung straight at Klein. Klein simply dodged to the side, then lightly hooked his foot, sending the man crashing face first to the ground. "Enough. I don't have time to play these childish games with you. You're just taking your anger out on me because Delern beat you." Klein brought Dunkel into the woods and asked if he had a spare sword. Hearing that, Dunkel immediately offered up his personal sword with both hands. He couldn't understand what Klein was trying to do. Someone who's never even touched a sword before, why does he want one now? Before that thought had even fully settled, Klein casually spun the blade in a clean flourish. "Do my movements look like Delern's from earlier?" After getting an answer in the affirmative, Klein told him to leave first, planning to confirm something for himself. Just as Dunkel turned to go, Klein slowly closed his eyes, because he had already sensed Delern's subtle movements earlier. A simple opening stance. In his memory, Delern's movements became faster and faster, and clearer and clearer. He leveled the sword and thrust it forward, as the meteor sword technique carried flowing magic with it. Klein suddenly opened his eyes, and the mana inside his body began surging wildly. Feeling that terrifying power, Knight Dunkel abruptly turned his head. Could this be? Before he could even finish, Klein brought the sword down in a single stroke, splitting the massive boulder ahead clean in two. And at that moment, it meant he had officially stepped onto the path of the sword. Seeing that scene, Dunkel was completely stunned. With power like this, even I, an S rank, couldn't possibly do it. Not long after, Klein received an invitation. After reading it carefully, he realized it was for a hunting event in the forest. "Looks like Dalton wants to use this chance to set me up. But I don't really have a good reason to refuse." At that moment, Klein turned to look at the longsword resting against the wall. During this time, he had constantly studied and replayed the swordsmanship of masters, and gradually began to understand the hidden power inside himself. At the same time, he unexpectedly discovered that he had the talent to replicate techniques he had seen. It was just that, for now, he still didn't know where exactly that ability came from. After learning that Klein had accepted the invitation, the butler immediately began preparing the carriage for the trip. Suddenly, the Holy Knight garrison asked about the hunting event, and even volunteered to accompany Klein to the hunting grounds. Instantly, Klein's guard shot up. He said he had an unexplainable sense of unease, so he had to go along. The carriage slowly made its way toward the western forest. Klein gazed at the scenery passing by outside the window, his heart sinking as he realized the land before him barely resembled the one in his memories. Once, 100 years ago, this place had been the frozen battlefield, covered in corpses, but now it was lush and overflowing with life. And Klein knew very well that the reason this land had changed so drastically was because of the far-reaching impact that man had left behind back then. When the carriage arrived, it suddenly came to a stop, and Dunkel reminded Klein that they had reached their destination. In the end, their group arrived at the other party's private estate. Klein carefully examined the layout and scale of the entire manor, and the luxury here far surpassed even his own main family's residence. It's obviously just a hunting party for a bunch of young nobles, yet they're making this big of a show. Looks like this guy really is planning something. Suddenly, Dalton appeared before everyone with several vicious hunting dogs, staring fixedly at Klein with a cruel look in his eyes. "Well, my estate's impressive, isn't it? Unlike your family, which is so poor there's nothing left but an empty shell." At that moment, Klein noticed that the hunting dogs beside him were all skin and bones, in miserable condition. In the very next second, Dalton let go of every leash in his hand, and announced on the spot that the hunt had officially begun. But Klein had already seen through his vicious plan. Meat bait had been placed all over the forest in advance, so those starving hounds would be driven into a frenzy and attack anyone they came across, because once hunger-crazed, a hunting dog's sense of smell becomes abnormally sharp. Dalton let the hounds run wild through the forest while drawing his bow and nocking arrows, treating the entire hunt like nothing more than a game for his own entertainment. Watching that reckless grin on his face, Klein already understood that this hunt, prepared specifically to kill him, had truly begun. Aaron hurried to the estate in search of Klein, and Dalton recognized at a glance that she was Klein's personal maid. His words were full of contempt and arrogance, and while toying with her casually, he even reached out and played with her hair without restraint. Klein strode forward and grabbed Dalton's wrist. "Take your hand off her before I break it. Get the hell away from her. Otherwise, you can forget about keeping that hand." Dalton was completely enraged by Klein's move, humiliation twisting straight into fury. "If you've got the guts, then keep up." With that, he leapt onto his horse. He was still shouting arrogantly, but the madness in his eyes was impossible to hide. Klein told Dunkel to stay behind and protect Aaron, then mounted his own horse, while handing over a magical signal scroll. This scroll carried a special enchantment. Once torn open and activated, the family crest Klein carried on him would instantly light up in response. At the same time, he deliberately told Khmer, "If that devil traveling with us suddenly disappears, tear the scroll immediately and send out a warning." Klein looked down at the family crest in his hand, knowing full well that a dangerous and unpredictable hunt for survival had officially begun. He kicked his horse forward without hesitation, and after making all the arrangements, galloped straight into the dim forest night. Following the path through the woods, he chased that bastard all the way in. But in the middle of the pursuit, he suddenly sensed that the atmosphere around him had turned eerily strange. Meanwhile, Dalton had already been waiting quietly in the clearing ahead. Looking at the corpses of the hunting dogs on the ground, Klein said, "So I was your target all along." Hearing that, Dalton showed a cold, vicious smile. "From the very beginning, you were the only target of this hunt. And once I cut off your head, I'll use it to provoke Dolern too. Your family is nothing but a hollow shell living off its old name. And you, this so-called young master, are just a useless fake with an empty title. You might as well be target practice for me." Not long after those words fell, a group of masked assassins emerged silently from the shadows of the woods and surrounded Klein from every side. Dalton deliberately mocked Klein's status and background, convinced he had no right to resist and was doomed to die here tonight. He laughed out loud without the slightest restraint. "Tomorrow, everyone will know that you died in this forest and ended up as dog food." Listening to those hypocritical, clumsy excuses coming out of the other man's mouth, Klein slowly straightened up, a faint smile rising in his heart, his eyes brimming with contempt held down to its limit. That strange reaction made the people facing him start to feel uneasy instead, their expressions turning tense, their eyes full of suspicion and fear, not daring to move recklessly. Klein slowly lifted his head, and a crimson light surfaced in his eyes. "Since you want to play, then I'll play with you to the very end." At the sight of that, Dalton panicked instantly, cold sweat forming on his forehead, completely unable to understand why Klein suddenly seemed like a different person. Klein's expression turned ice cold. "This family's former glory was bought with my life. Since you dare trample on that glory however you please, then you'll pay the price." And in that very moment, everyone felt that strange power grow so intense that even the air seemed to tremble. Ignoring everyone's alarmed faces, Klein softly began reciting an ancient incantation. "Awaken, ancient souls sleeping beneath the earth. Make your pact in my name, answer my summons, and return from the depths below." Blue-green ghost flames began drifting through the woods. Countless bones burst from the earth and lunged viciously toward Dalton and his men. The other side instantly fell into panic and terror, recognizing at a glance that this was necromancy long believed lost. And at that moment, with an army of skeletons gathered around him, Klein looked like a lord of death deciding who lived and who died. "Go, devour every last one who stands before you with malice in their heart." At that moment, in Klein's memory, it felt as if a full 200 years had flashed by in an instant. Those lost years had long since become blurred, leaving only himself walking alone down that road paved with white bones. But he could still hear the voices of the dead calling to him again and again from the depths of the darkness. That familiar pulse and resonance instantly brought every fragment of the past flooding back to Klein. And at that very moment, he finally grasped that long-lost sensation again, his old power surging once more into the palm of his hand. Dalton, on the opposite side, was filled with disbelief and simply could not accept what he was seeing. They had finally realized Klein's true identity, the legendary Archimonde, and were scared out of their minds on the spot. Klein curled his lips into a cold smile and admitted it openly. "That's right, I once used that name." The others who had come to kill him were just as stunned. They had always believed Archimonde was nothing more than a ridiculous rumor. And even those undead could not stop trembling before Klein, letting out fearful cries. Yet when they saw the skeletons Klein had summoned, they all burst out laughing instead, mocking him for putting on such a show when all he had called out was a bunch of low-level trash. After sizing them up, Dalton sneered that he had killed more of these things than he could even remember. They didn't take the skeletons seriously at all, and even joked that after killing them, they could bring a bone back as a souvenir. At that moment, Dalton immediately gave the order, "Ranged unit, prepare." The archers and gunners raised their weapons at the same time, drawing them all the way back, waiting only for the order to unleash a volley on Klein. With a single command, arrows rained down toward him like a storm. Every one of them thought Klein would be turned into a pincushion this time and had no chance of surviving. But in the next second, everyone froze. Not a single arrow managed to injure Klein at all. Those skeletons used their bodies and bone shields to forcibly block every attack for him. 200 years was far too long, and no one could recognize the true identities of these skeletons anymore. Seeing that, no one could believe skeletons could actually raise bone shields to defend themselves. Klein calmly told them, "These things are nothing like the ones you've seen before. Don't compare them to that kind of common trash." Now it was his turn. Klein ordered the skeletons to drop their defensive formation and prepare to attack. He slowly clenched his fist, and with a single command, every skeleton charged at the enemy at once. The skeletons rushed forward like a tidal wave, catching everyone completely off guard. No one had imagined skeletons could move that fast, smashing through the entire defensive line in a single rush. One of them tried to stay calm and hold the formation, only to be run through on the spot by a skeleton's blade. The skeleton army rolled over the line like a flood, crushing them into total collapse and chaos. At that moment, Klein ordered the 2nd Infantry Squad to flank from both sides and seal them in completely. His skeleton crossbowmen were already in position too, bows fully drawn and waiting only to deliver the finishing blow. With a single order from Klein, bone arrows whistled through the sky, and screams erupted everywhere in an instant. They had no power to resist at all. In front of Klein's skeleton legion, they were nothing but lambs waiting for slaughter. Dalton was completely panicked. He couldn't believe these skeletons could actually be this strong. He knew that if this kept going, his entire side would be wiped out, so he could only grit his teeth and order everyone to abandon ranged weapons and switch to close combat. Cursing the whole time, he swung his sword at the skeletons. After struggling for a long time, he finally smashed one skeleton's head apart and thought he had finally found a way to break the stalemate. But the moment the skull went flying, that headless body still lunged straight at him. Klein sneered and reminded him, "My skeletons were never the same as those ordinary ones." The severed skeleton head actually rolled back to its body on its own, reattached itself, and then rose to its feet again. That sight made Dalton break down on the spot. Klein said lightly, "Skeletons summoned by magic are not that easy to kill. They even know tactics and formations." At that moment, everyone else panicked too, cursing those monsters that simply refused to die. And Klein stood at the center of the army, staring coldly at this pack of scum, ready to continue the slaughter. Even though this body could currently summon no more than 11, it was already more than enough. The scene shifted, and back at the estate, the Holy Knight garrison was telling Maid Erin's stories about Klein. Hearing it, Erin's eyes sparkled, and with admiration written all over her face she kept saying, "Young Master is amazing." She even said that young Master would share his biscuits with her, never knowing that at this very moment, Klein was personally harvesting lives. Klein watched the vermin in front of him, his gaze cold and unwavering. One after another, people in the crowd fell, and cries of agony rang out nonstop. Dalton swung his sword with all his strength, yet could only watch helplessly as those skeletons reassembled themselves again and again. He trembled with rage. "Damn monster. Since they can't be killed, then all I have to do is kill you, and this army will disappear on its own." The moment he figured that out, Dalton charged at Klein like a madman. In an instant, he raised his sword and brought it down in a full-force slash. He roared that he would personally put an end to this disgusting farce of keeping company with corpses. And he firmly believed that as long as he killed Klein, everything would come to an end. At that moment, a purple glow quietly lit up in Klein's eyes. The Eye of God opened, instantly seeing through the path and weakness in Dalton's strike. Electric light surged around Klein, and in his mind he recalled a technique he had once seen. Dalton was horrified to discover that Klein had actually used the secret sword technique of the Rhineland family. The purple flash of the meteor sword slashed through the night, sweeping across and striking straight at a vital point. He lowered his head in disbelief and looked at the chest that had been pierced through. Before his consciousness faded, Klein's voice sounded beside his ear. "Don't expect a peaceful death, Dalton. The real torment is only beginning now." Standing before Dalton, who had collapsed to the ground coughing blood, Klein actually agreed with what the other man had just said. "Once a necromancer falls, everything I created loses its power, and that was exactly how I was defeated before. I can feel that Archimonde's demonic power is still flowing inside me. And it's precisely because of the Rhineland family's ability that this power has been preserved. The blood shed by my enemies continuously strengthens me. That has also become the key support behind my rapid growth in strength. Klein looked down at the dying Dalton. Ever since awakening in this body, he had no longer been able to turn a blind eye to conflict. At the same time, Klein secretly swore that he would restore this family with his own hands. At that moment, Dalton slowly woke from the depths of darkness. He tried to move, only to discover that all 4 of his limbs were tightly bound. When he looked up and finally saw his surroundings clearly, he realized he was tied to a chair covered in spikes. Turning toward the shadows, he discovered a strange figure standing in the darkness. This is where dead souls end up, the netherworld created by Archimonde. Make no mistake, from here on, you will very pleasantly experience what pain truly feels like. Right in front of him, Klein exposed the evil deeds Dalton had committed in life, abusing hunting dogs, and inflicting violence in the name of hunting. What's more, Klein still clearly remembered the hideous smile on his face when he committed those acts. Suddenly, Dalton snapped back to his senses. He clearly remembered Klein's sword piercing him, but now his body looked completely unharmed. Dalton broke down and shouted, "Impossible," furiously denouncing this absurd nonsense about Archimonde and the netherworld. But Klein ignored his screams, blue flames igniting in his palm. "Nothing you say matters anymore. Enjoy it. The souls you tortured and slaughtered have come to collect your life." Looking at those hunting dogs filled with venomous hatred, Dalton trembled all over and could not even force out a full sentence. "Listen carefully. Listen to the wails of the souls you tortured and killed." At that moment, the souls of the hunting dogs pounced on him and tore into him madly, and Klein wanted him to remember that hellish pain forever. Because this hell was built by Dalton himself through every evil act he committed while alive. In the endless tearing and biting, he screamed in agony and could only beg pitifully for mercy, but it had no effect at all. All that remained in his eyes was endless fear and tears of despair. The scene returned to reality. Dalton lay in a pool of blood, already completely devoid of life. Klein stood where he was as the undead behind him let out low growls, and he decided to answer the aid those undead had given him. Raising his hand, he cast magic and released the curse binding those skeleton spirits, giving their freedom back to them. The skeleton spirits then turned into specks of light and slowly drifted away. At that moment, Klein's heart was filled with complicated emotions. Looking at the corpses scattered all over the ground, he couldn't help wondering why, after clearly dying once already, he had been allowed to return to the world of the living. Just then, a mysterious figure suddenly appeared. "Not bad. So young, and already this strong. Who are you, and why are you here? You don't need to know." The moment those words fell, the stranger raised a hand and cast Soul Return, the corpse control spell. Green light instantly swallowed the battlefield, and countless corpses were forcibly awakened, turning into undead soldiers under his command. Klein's pupils shrank instantly as he recognized it at once as a signature corpse control spell of a necromancer. "I didn't expect there to still be necromancers left in this world. Even though Dalton failed, these corpses should still be useful to me." At the same time, back at the estate, Erin was smiling as she shared embarrassing stories from Klein's childhood with Knight Duncan. But Duncan was in no mood for small talk at all. He noticed that Klein had taken the emergency signal scroll with him too, and he suddenly realized that Klein and Dalton had already been in the forest for a full 3 hours with no news at all. A sense of dread instantly surged in his heart, and he immediately moved to head into the forest to look for Klein, only to be stopped by his subordinates. They advised him that the hunt was not over yet, and if he abandoned his post now, the consequences would be serious, so he should wait a little longer. Dunkel recognized at once that the men blocking his path carried the crest of the Conwell family and were Dalton's guards. "I am the commander of the Rhineland family's knights. It is not your place to tell me how to do my job. I suggest you don't overestimate yourselves." Faced with Duncan's hardline attitude, the guards blocking him immediately showed fear and no longer dared to keep stopping him. Erin also noticed right away that Knight Duncan's expression was off. "Erin, take the priest back to the estate first." But Erin said that Garrison had already left earlier, and the moment Dunkel heard that, he instantly realized something was seriously wrong. He suddenly remembered Klein's earlier instruction: if Garrison disappears, crush the signal scroll immediately. The moment that thought hit him, Dunkel jumped onto a horse and crushed the emergency signal scroll on the spot. He had already realized this was absolutely no coincidence. Something had happened to Klein. Meanwhile, Klein stood before the undead army and realized that the demonic energy in his body had already been exhausted, leaving him temporarily unable to keep using necromancy. Looking at the undead drawing closer and closer, his expression darkened completely. Running out of demonic energy had pushed him into a dead end. The corpses controlled by the mysterious man were unstable to begin with, yet he still ordered the undead to kill Klein directly. Looking at the undead surging toward him, Klein slowly clenched his fist, preparing to activate the crescent mark on his hand. At that moment, the undead roared and lunged straight at him. The mysterious man thought victory was already in his hands, never realizing that Klein had already activated the holy mark on his hand. Suddenly, the other man sensed that something was wrong, but by then it was already too late. A figure dropped from the sky and smashed a heavy punch straight into the undead army. At the same time, he chanted holy words, "Purify all filth, and let the undead turn to ash." Golden light swept across the battlefield like a tidal wave, and every controlled corpse was instantly purified clean. The mysterious man's necromancy was completely shattered, and he stared at the scene before him in total disbelief. As the golden light faded, a figure appeared in front of Klein. "You're safe now, young Master Klein." And after sensing that energy, Garrison also arrived at the scene in time. Garrison was one of the Pope's agents, humanoid weapons who acted only on orders. As the Church's highest combat force, they were also capable of wielding holy relics left behind by Saint Gall. According to rumor, every one of these agents possessed terrifying power enough to rival a fortress. The black-robed necromancer endured the impact of the holy light, and pain he could no longer suppress spread across his face. Golden holy radiance swept across the battlefield, and nearly all of the undead were erased in an instant. Seeing that scene, the necromancer finally understood the truth. He had provoked someone far beyond his level. And at that moment, Klein stood quietly at the center of the battlefield. So this is the Church's top agent. At that moment, for the first time, he truly felt that nearly suffocating pressure. As wave after wave of undead rushed in to kill, they kept pressing closer and closer from every side. Golden holy power condensed around Garrison's fists, and with a raise of his hand he blasted them all away. Holding the holy scripture with a cold expression, every move he made blew apart several undead heads on the spot. "You sinners should all kneel and repent." The others didn't even have time to react before they were blasted away by the force Garrison released. And those undead, having lost all reason, knew only how to keep lunging forward in a frenzy. At that moment, Garrison stepped forward, and with the holy scripture in hand, launched a relentless series of attacks. A streak of golden light flashed past, every blow aimed straight at a fatal point. Seeing that, the necromancer at the side felt his heart sink instantly. "It's over. He's coming for me." Realizing the situation had turned bad, the necromancer didn't hesitate for even a second and turned to flee. But he had barely made it any distance at all before an invisible force pinned him in place. In the blink of an eye, Garrison appeared behind him, grabbed him by the head, and lifted him straight into the air. "Spare me. I didn't know who you were. Please, have mercy. Your repentance is not over. Only death can release you." The moment those words fell, Garrison's grip tightened. The necromancer's breathing became weaker and weaker, his eyes turning bloodshot, until Garrison delivered the final judgment and crushed his head in one squeeze. Klein stood quietly off to the side, watching the situation shift, as a faint white light flashed silently across the ground. An eyeball rolled right to Klein's feet. Looking at the horrific scene in front of him, cold sweat slowly began to bead on his forehead. This devil only took one step forward, and the pressure he gives off is already this overwhelming. He tore more than 20 enemies apart on the spot with nothing but the aura he released. Klein watched Garrison walk toward him step by step, and slowly raised that blood-stained hand. Has this guy completely lost it from all the killing? Is he going to kill me too? Suddenly, Garrison spoke. "No, something's not right. I sensed the aura of necromancy earlier, so I rushed here immediately. But looking at the situation now, something feels off." He placed a hand on Klein's shoulder. "The energy I sensed just now was clearly not this." He fixed Klein with a sharp stare, as if he could see straight through every thought in his mind. Looking at this man, Klein felt a chill run down his spine. Did he figure it out? If I show even the slightest opening, this guy will kill me on the spot. At that very moment, Knight Dunkel came galloping over on horseback. "Young Master Klein, are you alright?" Only after seeing Dunkel arrive did Klein finally feel a little relieved. Suddenly, a trace of blood spilled from the corner of his mouth. "I didn't expect the backlash from using necromancy to be this bad." Seeing that, Dunkel hurried over to check on Klein. "Help me up for a second. My legs are a little weak. That devil nearly scared me so badly I couldn't stand. And I'm drained all over right now. I barely have any strength left, so stop talking nonsense." When everyone asked where Dalton was, Klein directly stated that Dalton had already died by his hand. After the matter reached the Nobles' Council, Count Conwell learned the news and flew into a rage on the spot. No matter what, he refused to believe it, insisting that his son could never have done something like assassination. At the same time, the Count turned around and angrily accused Klein of killing someone and deliberately slandering his own son. Everyone there wanted to get to the bottom of the truth, but unexpectedly, Duke Rhineland had already secured decisive evidence. He publicly declared that Klein's testimony had remained completely consistent from beginning to end, without changing a single word. Then, with a flourish, he produced the mercenary mobilization orders, exposing Dalton's carefully hidden malice for all to see. Seeing that, Count Conwell was both shocked and furious. I didn't expect those useless idiots to leave behind so much evidence. The nobles present also couldn't understand how Klein, who normally had no combat ability at all, had managed to kill Knight Dalton. Many of them discussed it in private, all convinced that Klein simply didn't have the strength to face Dalton head-on. At that moment, Count Conwell forcibly suppressed his anger and began recalculating everything in his mind, preparing to cover up his scheme another way. He even openly mocked Klein's claim of being Archimonde. Then he flipped the accusation around on the spot, insisting that Klein had secretly hired assassins to kill Dalton. Duke Rhineland immediately cut him off and sternly reminded the Count to watch his words in the council chamber. Just as the argument in the hall seemed endless, a cold voice suddenly rang out. I had only just stepped into the nobles' council hall, and I could already hear you spouting this nonsense outside the door. I've already made the truth of the matter very clear. Someone secretly interfered and turned the mercenaries into undead. Hearing that, Count Conwell immediately snapped back, stubbornly insisting that everything Klein said was a lie. Then do you also think the part about me being Archimonde is true? The moment he heard those words, the Count froze on the spot and instantly fell silent. Klein still remembered that not long ago, he had sworn to himself that he would revive this family and purge the scum within it, and just as he was planning to start dealing with the branch factions, a knock suddenly came from outside the door. A blonde girl pushed the door open and walked in. Klein recognized her at a glance. She was Leia, commander of the Blue Holy Spear Knights. He couldn't help wondering why she had suddenly appeared in the nobles' council hall. At the same time, someone openly questioned whether Leia was qualified to attend the meeting, and Duke Rhineland immediately stepped forward to explain. Because of the incident involving Dalton, Leia is qualified to participate in this meeting. Leia took off her coat, her eyes sharp and cold, and the moment she raised her gaze, it met Klein's directly. She then took the initiative and said she wanted to speak with Klein alone. Klein had never expected the other side to suddenly make such a request. After hearing that, Duke Rhineland thought for a moment, then nodded in agreement, and instructed Klein to return to the hall as soon as their conversation was over. At that moment, Klein grumbled inwardly, but he also understood that for him, this was actually a good opportunity. It seemed Leia taking the initiative to seek him out probably meant she had more than one purpose in mind. Still, no matter what scheme she had, Klein responded with the same calm composure. Afterward, Klein followed Leia into the room, intending to use this chance to gain the upper hand. Klein and Leia entered the private room together, only for her to suddenly pin him against the wall. He couldn't figure out at all what this woman was trying to do. Klein was so startled by that sudden hand that his whole body stiffened for a moment. Leia leaned close to Klein and said she wanted to touch his hand. That immediately startled him. Why? Only when she grabbed Klein's hand did he realize she was inspecting it. This is not the hand of someone who uses a sword. It doesn't even have the most basic calluses. Tendons don't lie. Seeing how serious she was, Klein became so tense for a moment that he couldn't say a word. So, kid, you've never touched a sword. If you've never touched a sword, then how did you survive against knights and mercenaries? Or maybe you're hiding some kind of unknown power. At that moment, Klein abruptly raised his hand to block her. At the same moment, he suppressed the panic in his heart and casually brought up whether she suspected he was Archimonde. Even though he still smiled on the surface and tried to brush it off, he knew very clearly inside, this woman is dangerous. She's not curious at all. She's testing my reaction. If you want to say that, then fine. Let's say I'm Archimonde. The moment she heard that, she burst out laughing. You, Archimonde? You're just a little brat. What, you called me a little brat? Miss, do you even know how old I really am? Go ahead and say it again if you dare, and let's see if I get mad. After that, she carefully looked over Klein's build and appearance, bluntly saying he was far too different from the person she had imagined. Then suddenly, she changed the subject. If you can defeat a knight, I'll give you my first kiss. Hearing that, Klein froze on the spot, completely unable to understand what kind of logic that was. At that moment, thoughts raced through Klein's mind. He simply couldn't tell whether this woman was trying to win him over or set a trap for him. Then she turned around and walked straight ahead, saying that the real Archimonde could never possibly act the way he did. After walking back into the hall, Klein finally saw his own situation clearly. He was nothing more than the second son of a family that had stayed quiet for years, so how exactly had he managed to kill Dalton? The Count then opened his mouth to speak. But before he could finish, he was directly interrupted by Klein's father on the platform, who asked what exactly they had just talked about. Klein didn't waste another word. He reached out and gripped the hilt of his sword, then directly drew the longsword hanging at his waist. The atmosphere in the hall fell silent instantly. Everyone was startled by Klein's action. What is this guy trying to do? However, Klein paid no attention to anyone. He raised his sword and pointed it straight at Count Conwell. Let's stop wasting time. We'll settle all of this with the northern tradition of dueling. So quit talking nonsense and fight me one-on-one. The crowd immediately erupted in an uproar. No one had expected Klein to publicly propose a duel. Everyone knew the rules of trial by combat. It was an ancient form of judgment passed down in the north, and the result of the duel was the final verdict. Count Conwell couldn't understand at all why Klein wanted to do this. The reason is simple. You tried to kill me first, and afterward you turned around and slandered me. Just as the other side was about to speak, Klein directly cut him off again. Hurry up and answer. Seeing that, the Count slowly began to panic because of this sudden challenge. Duke Rhineland, Klein's father, personally stepped forward and guaranteed the result of the duel in the family's name. At that moment, the Count instantly came up with a new plan. He then pretended to ask Klein whether he had really decided to initiate the duel. If that's really the case, then I'll send my strongest knight to answer your challenge. Klein didn't show the slightest fear. No matter who the Count sent, what he wanted was simple, for everyone to witness with their own eyes how he used a sword. And in the end, the duel was set for 4 days later. Klein looked at Leia, whose expression remained cold beside him, and had already decided to use this chance to set the rotten family in order. What, you want to duel the Count? Absolutely not. Delerne kept trying to persuade him. Klein, do you understand what this means? I know. How many times are you going to ask me that? If this won't work, then let me fight in your place. Delerne sincerely wanted to protect Klein, planning to use his own swordsmanship to shield him from this crisis. Hearing that, Klein calmly pointed out what was really at stake. If someone else fought in his place, it would only create even more trouble inside the family. That's enough. If this family is going to rise again, then I have to fight this battle myself. And this battle is also the price I have to pay to clear my name. Memories of the past suddenly flooded his heart. Delerne had once joyfully welcomed Klein's birth. Scenes from their childhood together surfaced as well, and when Delerne had first seen Klein, his eyes had held nothing but gentleness and kindness. Now that he learned Klein was about to step into a life-and-death duel, Delerne still couldn't suppress the complicated emotions in his heart. Listen to me, Klein, you have to win this battle, and I. Before he could finish, the butler hurried over to report. Young Master Klein, this opponent's name is Randall. He is a powerful knight from the Empire who was expelled from the Order. And the reason he was expelled from the Empire's camp was because he couldn't suppress his own brutal urge to kill. Moreover, this man is deeply indulgent in drink and excess. Most importantly, he simply cannot control his killing impulses. All he wants is to brutally torture his opponents in the dueling arena. After explaining the opponent's situation, the butler handed a custom-made longsword to Klein, and warned him that the sword had a major weakness. The moment it collided with a blade infused with magical power, it would shatter on the spot. At that moment, Klein firmly gripped the longsword in his hand, already prepared to face the decisive battle ahead. The scene shifted. He stepped onto the dueling ground with sword in hand, his face expressionless. What no one there had expected was that, despite possessing no magic at all, he had actually shown up as promised. At that moment, Klein listened to all kinds of whispers from the stands. Delerne should be the one stepping onto this stage, not worthless trash like him. But Klein paid no attention to those clowns at all. He simply stood there quietly, waiting for his opponent to appear. Yet that man didn't show himself for a long time. Suddenly, a massive shadow swallowed Klein completely as a figure overflowing with killing intent appeared behind him. This man was Randall, the Empire's strongest warrior. Boy, you're even smaller than I imagined. Still, I am curious what kind of sound you'll make when I snap your neck. Klein was startled by Randall's sudden move and jumped back in alarm, quickly swinging his sword as he retreated. Seeing him retreat in such a hurry, Randall immediately mocked him, laughing at how timid Klein was. That guy really did scare me just now. That backward step was entirely because Garrison had frightened him so badly last time that his body now instinctively dodged first. At that moment, Leia in the stands was quietly watching the scene. The person beside her urged her to leave, but she acted as if she hadn't heard a thing and didn't move at all. She remembered the agreement between herself and Klein. If he won this duel, she would take the initiative to kiss him. And at that moment, Klein on the stage could only fake 2 coughs to cover up the awkwardness. My neck hasn't been feeling very good lately, so you'd better not touch it. But Randall didn't take Klein's words seriously at all. I told you not to touch me, you sick bastard. Hearing Klein say that, Randall's face filled with disdain. Suddenly, he threw a punch with terrifying force, the blow so fierce that it smashed the ground apart. His heavy punch slammed into the floor, making the entire dueling arena tremble. Looking at the torn piece of clothing in his hand, Randall froze on the spot. Where the hell did that brat go? The spectators in the stands also cried out in alarm, shocked by Randall's strength, and even more shocked that Klein had seemingly vanished right there in the arena. At that moment, Klein had already silently moved behind him, still holding that sword at his side. What a crude brute. Taking him head-on would definitely be a bad idea. Looks like I'll have to switch styles if I want to deal with an opponent like this safely. Before Klein had even finished that thought, Randall charged again. The longsword in his hand whistled through the air as it came chopping straight down at Klein's head. Klein sidestepped to dodge, and at the same time drew his sword with the motion. With a single slash, he cut straight toward Randall's neck. But the instant the blade came down, Randall caught it with a backhanded grab. In the next second, he twisted violently and hurled Klein away. Klein lost hold of his sword and had only just regained his footing when he saw Randall advancing step by step, giving him no time to breathe as the longsword wrapped in violent wind came straight for him. At that critical moment, Klein could only raise his sword to barely block. The sheer impact made both his hands go numb, and even the web between his thumb and forefinger throbbed with pain. Seeing Klein constantly retreat and dodge, Randall shouted, "Kid, aren't you supposed to be impressive? Why aren't you using your necromancy? Aren't you the great Archimon?" Randall kept pressing him nonstop, and Klein grew more and more irritated, even starting to think about using a hidden technique. At that moment, he suddenly exerted force and instantly opened up the distance between them. Instead, Randall was forced to stop where he stood, something no one had expected, because Klein's burst of power was actually this strong. Everyone watching the duel were stunned expressions. No one could believe that Randall had failed to crush Klein in a single move. Even Randall himself was full of confusion, unable to understand how his assault had been stopped. Suddenly, a cold and ominous aura swept across the entire arena. A massive phantom silently appeared behind Klein. The people in the stands sensed the strange atmosphere too and began speculating one after another about why Randall had failed to break through for so long. "Don't worry, I won't use necromancy. Because I am Klein, and you will fall only to my sword." Randall forcibly suppressed his emotions and told himself that his earlier failure to kill in one blow had simply been a mistake. Knowing Klein had no magical enhancement, he immediately circulated his magic and unleashed the Empire's orthodox swordsmanship. The terrifying thing about this style was how its vast magic tempered the entire body. Even the flow of blood itself would push every part of the body's abilities to the limit. Randall, his whole body wrapped in blazing magic, charged at full speed, clearly intending to decide the match in a single blow. He was determined to rely on absolute explosive force to crush Klein completely. Faced with that kind of assault, Klein calmly stepped back and easily avoided the full power strike. At that moment, every single one of Randall's techniques had already been completely read by Klein. Even the path of his skill and the flow of his magic were crystal clear. In Klein's eyes, all of Randall's movements had slowed down. Whether it was the path of his attacks or the openings in his body, everything was laid bare before him without the slightest cover. That string of failures finally drove Randall completely into a rage. He swung his sword again, slashing with full force, and the sharp sword energy instantly tore through the surrounding air. But even this round of fierce attacks still failed to land, and that terrifying sword force only blasted up a cloud of dust from the ground. After the dust slowly settled, Randall still couldn't grasp Klein's movements. He simply couldn't accept that Klein had read through his sword path so easily. Klein leapt into the air, his longsword aimed straight at the unguarded weak point on Randall's back. At the same time, he unleashed the meteor sword form, and the fierce sword energy slashed straight across Randall's back on the spot. That scene shocked everyone present. Even the Duke in the arena recognized that exquisite sword technique at a glance. The intense pain made Randall scream on the spot. He simply couldn't believe that Klein, who had no magic, could wound him so badly in a single strike. And even Klein himself hadn't expected that move to actually work. Seeing this, every spectator in the audience was left utterly stunned by the battle unfolding before them. Even the Valkyrie, who had been silently watching the fight the whole time, widened her eyes in shock. Klein had wielded a longsword and displayed Ryland swordsmanship in front of everyone. Even without enough magic in his body, he was still able to use the family's secret technique. Although the power was somewhat weaker, for Klein, it was already more than enough to deal with the man in front of him. Even though Randall had already been beaten by Klein, he still refused to admit defeat. Suddenly, the aura around Randall exploded outward, and he kept growling, "I haven't lost." His eyes turned blood red, his body swelled, and every part of him radiated violent energy. That sight instantly changed the expressions of everyone in the stands, as they recognized it as the exclusive secret art of the Randall family. Suddenly, violent magic erupted with a roar, sealing off every route Klein could have used to dodge in an instant. Yet faced with that kind of terrifying pressure, Klein only found it laughable. Randall came slashing at Klein like a beast, carrying a savage blade storm with him. Seeing this, Delern on the platform grew anxious and immediately shouted a warning. But Randall's attack was already right in front of him, so Klein instantly raised his sword to block. The two weapons crashed into each other with brutal force, and dazzling sparks exploded across the arena in an instant. But what Randall didn't know was that the longsword Klein had previously asked Dunkel to custom make had been prepared for this exact moment from the very beginning. The moment it struck the sixth sword infused with magic, it would shatter completely. Everything went exactly as planned. and the longsword in Klein's hand began to crack apart. A vicious smile instantly spread across Randall's face. He thought Klein's weapon was finished and that he no longer had any room to fight back. But this was exactly the moment Klein had been waiting for. Seizing that tiny opening, he swung the broken sword and cut off Randall's weapon and hand in the same strike. Just as Klein was about to bring the broken blade down again, the Duke spoke in time and stopped the duel. Seeing this, the entire audience was too stoned to say a word. Even Dunkel, a powerful figure among the knights, couldn't help sighing in admiration at how refined Klein's swordsmanship was. All the earlier setup and baiting had been for the sake of deciding the match with this one strike. And Klein, relying on pure skill, firmly claimed victory in this duel. At that moment, Randall clutched his mangled arm and screamed in agony. The medical staff at the scene immediately rushed into the arena and urgently stopped the bleeding. Klein, meanwhile, simply stood there coldly, quietly watching everyone cast healing magic to save him. He casually asked the medics, "Can that thing still be reattached?" The medical staff replied, "We can only stop the bleeding for now. After that, he'll probably have to rely on a prosthetic." Looking at the scene in front of him, Klein couldn't help muttering under his breath, "It's already been 200 years, and healing magic still hasn't improved much." Seeing Klein's cold and composed attitude, even the Duke began to feel a trace of unease. Klein quickly snapped back to himself. "The current me isn't Archimond anymore. So should I pretend to be a little more scared?" Meanwhile, Count Conwell watched the powerful expert he had hired at great cost suffer total defeat, and his heart couldn't calm down for a long time. At that moment, the Duke reminded him that since the duel was over, he had to follow the rules and accept the conditions set by the victor. "Impossible. I've already lost my son and my personal knight. I will never admit fault on top of that." And in that very instant, he suddenly felt as if a blade had brushed across his neck. Klein stared at him with an icy gaze, and slowly spoke the name, Delkin Conwell. At that moment, the other man's mental state completely collapsed. His whole body stiffened in place, and for a moment he couldn't recover at all. He instinctively clutched his throat, completely unable to understand why he had suddenly lost control just now. Before he could keep thinking about it, Klein had already spoken. As the victor of the duel, he issued his command, ordering him to sincerely repent before the King of the North for his past crimes. Klein used a special ability to force pressure onto him, making the man lower his head and bow as he begged for mercy. The hidden power of the curse took effect instantly at that very moment. Boundless darkness closed in, carrying phantom visions of the undead. The shadow of death enveloped his whole body, and overwhelming terror steadily ate away at his mind and will. In the end, he could endure no more. His legs gave out, and he dropped to his knees on the spot, trembling as he confessed his crimes. Klein simply stood there quietly, watching him keep bowing, pleading for mercy, and confessing every evil deed he had committed in the past. At that moment, the entire hall erupted in shock. No one had expected that a count like him had so many filthy secrets hidden behind the scenes. At that moment, Klein held his long sword and declared before everyone that every person present should listen carefully to what he was about to say. "I am the victor of this duel, son of Duchess Claire Ray Dilasis, second son of Heinkel Rhineland, the strongest knight of the North, Klein Rhineland." His father stood quietly to one side, silently watching Klein prove everything step by step with his own strength. At the same time, in a distant dark corner, a conspiracy targeting Klein was also quietly taking shape. Inside a dim church, the Pontiff Malik clasped his hands together and prayed in a low voice. The moment his words ended, Garrison's figure appeared behind him. Garrison reported to Malik, the surveillance target was attacked by a necromancer and undead. "There's no need to worry, all of this is part of the plan. That necromancer was nothing more than a pawn we deployed alongside the Empire, to deliberately spread panic so that, in their fear, the people would willingly throw themselves into the church's embrace." But before he could finish speaking, Garrison suddenly moved and grabbed him by the throat. "As a servant of the temple, you actually traded with heretics for the sake of a power struggle. Then what comes next is your death." The moment those words fell, he showed not the slightest mercy. With one squeeze, he crushed the head of that clergyman who had colluded with the cult. At that moment, Archbishop Perimenar slowly walked over. "Garrison, I didn't expect you to kill more clergy than necromancers. If others knew the secret hidden in your heart, they'd surely be shocked." At that moment, Garrison's face darkened, and he coldly asked whether Perimenar was the mastermind behind all of this. "Of course not. I merely approved the authorization, but I also brought new information. Once necromancy is used, it always leaves traces, so earlier you." As he spoke, he took out the cross marked with those traces. "This was left behind by the necromancer you killed. 2 different traces of necromancy remain inside this cross. One is the soul-summoning art developed by the Empire, and the other is primitive necromancy that controls souls rather than corpses. In other words, there were 2 necromancers at the scene, and the other necromancer is the target you are currently monitoring." Hearing that, Garrison's expression completely darkened, and he had already vaguely guessed the target's true identity. Perimenar stated it directly. The second son of the Rhineland family is a necromancer. The scene shifted, and thunder roared outside a mine tunnel in the pouring rain. A miner was swinging his pickaxe and wildly hacking at the crystal ore around him. The miner stopped to wipe away his sweat and catch his breath, but a strange sound suddenly came from behind him. He turned around in terror, only to see a massive shadow instantly swallow him whole, and the aura of death rushed straight at him. In the next second, the mine tunnel collapsed with a thunderous crash, and the violent tremor swept through the entire mountain forest along with the storm. A week passed, and the storm surrounding the duel had long since settled. Erin hugged a doll and laughed so hard in the study that she rocked back and forth. Klein, meanwhile, thought back to that moment of glory, when he had defeated Randall with the family's secret technique, and forced Count Conwell into confessing. At that moment, Klein had once believed he could finally gain a firm foothold within the family and earn everyone's recognition. But the real problem was that this body, only 15 years old, simply couldn't withstand high-intensity training. He flipped through the book in his hand. On the surface, it looked like nothing more than an ordinary volume, but hidden inside its pages was a complete notebook of necromancy. As he studied, he also estimated his own strength. With this body's current condition, he could summon at most only 11. And on top of that, he had to stay constantly wary of Garrison, because he could already sense that the man had started suspecting him. Just as he was thinking about how to secretly increase his strength, news arrived of undead causing chaos. The moment he saw the illustration of the undead creature in the report, Klein immediately decided this was the perfect opportunity. So he took the initiative to ask his father for permission to investigate the mine, since real combat was the fastest way to grow stronger. His father was concerned because casualties had already occurred at the mine, so he asked Klein whether he could truly handle something that dangerous alone. "That won't be a problem. This trip can increase my strength and also help me track down clues about the undead who ambushed me back then." Just when he thought he would finally be able to use necromancy freely, he hadn't expected his father to arrange for Knight Dunkel to accompany him the whole way. In the end, he could only accept the arrangement. Looking at Klein, Dunkel couldn't help remarking that his personality and way of doing things were nothing like those of boys his age. "Young master, maybe you really are Archimonde reincarnated." Hearing that, Klein immediately warned Dunkel, "Don't say things like that so carelessly again." "Of course not, young master. Archimonde was a demon who turned countless northerners into undead. You are not." Suddenly, waves of cold, sinister wind swept through the camp, and Klein instantly became alert. His gaze turned cold as well, and he solemnly warned Dunkel, "From now on, you're not allowed to say that again." And at that very moment, a shrill scream suddenly came from the direction of the mine. The small town near the mine instantly fell into chaos. Large numbers of undead rushed out of the cavern one after another, and the local residents panicked and scattered in every direction. The hideous undead roared as they lunged at the crowd, their eyes filled with nothing but the instinct to devour the living. And just then, a streak of golden sword light flashed by, instantly cutting down all the undead that had rushed forward. As Dunkel fought with all his strength, he kept turning back to check on Klein. Klein swung his longsword wrapped in purple light and struck cleanly at the undead monster hidden in the shadows that had launched a sneak attack. Then he turned to look at Dunkel, who had rushed over, and ordered him to go save the townspeople in danger first. Although Dunkel still had concerns, he ultimately chose to obey and leave, while Klein remained behind alone to wipe out the remaining undead. After all the surrounding undead had been eliminated, the rescued residents stepped forward one after another to express their thanks. But more importantly, they had to figure out when all of this had started. Klein carefully inspected the undead corpses and immediately confirmed that the spell used in this attack was exactly the same as the one used in the earlier ambush against him. The residents told the truth. 2 months after the mine was sealed off, people started disappearing one after another. After learning that these undead had originally been villagers from this town who were already dead, Klein immediately realized that this matter was far more complicated than it looked on the surface. At that moment, one villager, overwhelmed with emotion, rushed forward and grabbed Klein. "Tell me, are you really a member of the Rhineland family or not?" Dunkel quickly stepped forward and forcibly pulled the villager away. But even after being stopped, the villager still cried out in grief and anger. "Why would great families like yours give up on saving people?" Thinking about how hard those miners had worked while alive, only to become monsters manipulated by others now, even Klein felt complicated emotions rise in his heart. Faced with the villager's emotional crying and shouting, Klein's expression suddenly turned cold. He bluntly said that the man should not take his anger out on him. At that moment, Klein calmly laid out the facts. Neither the sealing of the mine nor the creation of the undead had been done by him. And besides, I'm not the one who turned your father and the others into undead either, am I? Klein instructed Dunkel to go deal with the situation at the scene first, then raised his hand and began gathering power, preparing to cast necromancy. At the same time, he softly recited his own exclusive incantation, soothing the dead souls in his own name and promising to help these lost spirits find their final resting place. Blue flames wrapped around Klein's body, and the pressure of necromancy fully unfolded. That immense power suppressed all the restless undead across the area, and the souls gradually calmed down. The spell expanded completely, and blue flames swept across the entire area. Those controlled miners finally became fully peaceful, and specks of blue soul light slowly separated from their bodies and rose into the night sky. Klein spoke to the souls in the language of the dead, soothing their resentment and promising that he would definitely find the one behind these evil acts. At that moment, Dunkel was completely stunned. At a glance, he recognized this as the ancient art of soul resonance. It was also a legendary spell that had already existed 200 years before the plague outbreak in the north. All the souls turned into blue light and drifted into the night sky. The noise and chaos finally faded completely, and the town returned to peace once more. Following the directions given by the villagers, Klein and Dunkel continued onward and eventually arrived at the entrance to the mine. At that moment, Dunkel finally couldn't hold back anymore and asked what exactly those spells had been just now. Klein merely explained calmly, "Those undead were simply thanking me." Then he added, "Those departed souls all wished to personally punish their enemies." The moment he heard the word revenge, Dunkel's gaze locked firmly onto Klein, and he once again voiced his suspicion about reincarnation. At that moment, Dunkel had slowly drawn the sword at his side, and Klein's reflection appeared on the blade. "Now, you should tell me who you really are." Just moments earlier, Klein had been held at sword point. He asked Dunkel, "Do you still remember what Becker Reinhold once said?" Dunkel immediately replied, "He said that character is more important than birth." "That's right, that is also why you were able to become captain of the knights. And after I left the monastery, you are the one who has stayed by my side the longest. How you choose is up to you. If you truly believe I am Archimonde, then strike now." Hearing those words, Dunkel fell silent for a long time. In the end, he lowered the sword in his hand. Klein knew very well that Dunkel had not truly believed him, only that he still hadn't made his final judgment. At that moment, Dunkel stated his position. "The one I'm loyal to is Klein, not some demon." Klein did not refute him. He simply shifted his gaze away in silence. Not long afterward, Klein led Dunkel into the abandoned mine. A flame flared up, instantly lighting the road ahead. By the firelight, enormous skeletons could be seen everywhere in the depths of the mine. They continued deeper inside, and the ground beneath their feet was covered in bones, enough to make anyone's scalp tingle. A heavy stench of decay filled the mine. At that moment, Klein warned Dunkel, "The corpses ahead are still moving." As he told Dunkel to stay on guard, he raised his hand and activated necromancy. Blue flames rose up, and several soldiers' corpses stood in response. Looking at those undead transforming into skeletons, shock instantly appeared on Dunkel's face. With a single order from Klein, the skeleton undead charged together toward the enemies ahead. The skeleton soldiers sprinted forward in a savage assault. In the blink of an eye, slaughter erupted completely. Looking at the carnage before him, Duncan was full of shock, while Klein remained calm the entire time. He coolly controlled the soldiers and continuously launched fierce attacks against the enemies inside the mine. Dunkel held up a torch and stayed close to Klein, retreating deeper into the mine with him. The firelight shone across Duncan's face, which was full of tension and unease. Dunkel quickly assessed the situation and bluntly said that they were currently outnumbered. Hearing that, Klein said nothing, and instead cast another spell to keep expanding their fighting strength. Blue flames spread across the ground and coiled around the corpses one by one. Seeing this, Klein said to Dunkel, "This is the undead conversion art, and it's also one of the necromancer's most commonly used tactics." Looking at the undead rising in waves before him, Klein calmly told Dunkel, "Now our fighting strength is enough." The moment those words fell, a roar came from the depths of the mine. "The next slaughter starts now." Klein ordered the vanguard skeletons to charge, while advancing with Dunkel at the same time. The skeleton soldiers were the first to cut their way forward. The mine turned into a brutal battlefield once again. Klein calmly deployed his forces, ordering the rear skeleton units to keep pressing in and support the front. Blue flames swept across the entire field. The enemy undead had no room to resist at all. Seeing low-level skeletons display this kind of combat power, Duncan was filled with disbelief. Meanwhile, Klein kept commanding his troops to advance steadily, their coordination so precise they were almost no different from a real army. The fighting in the mine gradually died down, until only the torches were left swaying in the dark. They had successfully crushed enemies several times their own number. At that moment, Klein told Dunkel, "From here on, only the two of us remain. Since you've already chosen to trust me, then stay with me until the very end." Suddenly, a drop of blood fell onto Duncan's face. Duncan looked down at the bloodstain in his palm, then slowly raised the torch in his hand. The firelight revealed several villagers hanging in the air by ropes ahead of them. These missing villagers had all been used as sacrifices for resurrection magic. Suddenly, a woman's voice full of mockery rang out. Resurrection magic naturally requires a large number of intact corpses as materials. You do know that basic common sense, don't you? The moment those words fell, the woman removed her hood. I really didn't expect to run into you here. The demon of the continent, Lord Archimonde. This sudden reunion left Klein speechless for a moment. Ever since your death in battle, plenty of people have researched necromancy, but most of them never got past the level of reviving corpses. Necromancers have long since fallen into decline. All that's left now is a bunch of second-rate mages who can only rely on corpses to fight. It's been a long time, Lord Archimonde. I am the necromancer Pell, and also one of your admirers. Klein had already seen clearly who had arrived, and he knew the real trouble was finally here. But faced with the magic surging around Pell, all he felt was contempt. Because with one glance, he recognized that trick of infusing magic into cloth as one necromancers commonly used. Suddenly, Dunkel drew his sword and shouted, "Enough with the nonsense. My master is Klein, not Archimonde. I was only joking. Why take it so seriously? But I do know those rumors about you, and I know that familiar feeling from just now. You're just like me. You are definitely a necromancer too. And honestly, you're ridiculous. A noble necromancer still using a longsword?" Suddenly, Duncan coldly cut her off. "That's enough. Tell us who's behind this and where the missing people are, and maybe you'll suffer a little less." But Pell ignored him completely and bluntly said that a true necromancer had no need to rely on weapons. In the next second, a mass of black gas spilled from Pell's mouth. A dense aura of death instantly wrapped itself around the villagers hanging in the air. As the black gas corroded their bodies, the villagers let out shrill screams on the spot. Their entire bodies seemed to be swallowed by a chill that pierced straight into the bone. At that moment, Pell raised her hand and summoned countless black shadows. This is the kind of power a necromancer should have. Now let me show you what real necromancy looks like. A pitch-black sphere of light condensed in her palm. In the next second, the sphere exploded with a roar. A giant hand made of corpses suddenly emerged. Then that giant palm slammed heavily into the ground, and the shockwave made the entire area tremble violently. Seeing this, cold sweat poured from Dunkel's forehead. "Young master, if we can't beat it, run first. I'll stay behind and cover you." Even after years of war, he had never seen such a bizarre monster, and he simply couldn't understand why this thing was so absurd. Only when the monster fully revealed itself did they finally see it clearly, a cyclops covered all over in eyes. Pell gently stroked the giant. "Baby, from here on, your task is to crush those two fools who don't know their place into meat paste." The moment she said that, the cyclops turned and charged over wrapped in a violent gale. When he saw that this monster could move this fast, Dunkel's pupils suddenly shrank. He shouted a warning. "Young master, run. I feel like this thing." Before he could finish, Klein had already raised his hand and shoved Dunkel aside. The giant palm came crashing down head-on. Klein felt a burst of intense pain explode through his entire body in an instant, and he was blasted away like a cannonball. As the dust slowly cleared, Klein propped himself up from the ground and sat up. "I didn't expect this thing to hit that hard." He raised a hand to wipe the blood from his mouth and stared fixedly at the cyclops across from him. The monster stepped toward Klein one heavy step at a time. Just as it raised its giant foot and was about to stomp down, Dunkel slashed out with his sword. "How dare you hurt my young master? I'll kill you." The power of a knight erupted instantly and forcibly severed the cyclops' leg on the spot. Seeing that, even Klein couldn't help exclaiming, "Dunkel, you're actually this strong?" But after being hurt, the cyclops immediately turned and launched a fierce assault on Dunkel. Dunkel rolled across the ground to dodge, and everywhere that giant palm came down, shattered stone exploded in all directions. At that moment, sudden applause rang out. Dunkel turned toward the sound. Pell clapped as she said, "That strike just now was beautiful, Mr. Knight. But at this level, it's still not quite enough." The moment those words fell, the Cyclops' damaged limb actually began to wriggle and regenerate. In the next second, it swung its giant palm and attacked again. "If young Master Klein hadn't pushed me away just now, I might already be dead. All I can do now is protect him with everything I have. And I even doubted him before. If I want to wash away that shame, then there's only one path left." The longsword lit up with golden radiance as Dunkel unleashed a full-force attack against the Cyclops. The Cyclops roared in pain and was driven back again and again by Duncan's assault. At that moment, Klein also rushed straight at the giant from the front, his longsword wrapped in golden light. More and more wounds appeared all over the giant's body. But that terrifying regenerative ability kept letting fresh flesh knit those wounds back together. As Dunkel swung his sword, he gritted out in a low voice, "This monster's healing speed is already beyond expectations. The blade kept hacking into the giant, sending sparks everywhere, yet still could not deal a fatal blow. He leapt onto the giant's arm and kept swinging, trying to find its true weak point. His target was that head covered in eyes, so he planned to end the fight quickly by cutting off the giant's head. The longsword slashed out with a sharp sound that split the air, aimed straight at the giant's head. But the giant dodged the strike by turning sideways, then countered with a palm strike at Dunkel. The longsword collided head-on with the giant palm, erupting in a burst of blinding light. Dunkel was blasted away on the spot by that terrifying force, and slammed heavily into the rock wall, then slid down to the ground with the falling rubble. He struggled to get back up, but his body no longer had any strength left. Seeing this, Pell sneered. How surprising. A knight this strong would be absolutely delicious if he became one of my undead. Thinking back, I carried out a huge number of human experiments in order to study necromancy. In the end, I succeeded in creating an undead creature that even a great demon could not replicate. At that moment, I knew my talent for necromancy was inborn. Just look at this perfect masterpiece of mine. My power now has long surpassed everyone else. Even my talent and knowledge have already gone beyond Archimonde. But at that very moment, Klein directly shattered her delusion. The first key to creating a Cyclops giant was the core connection point. Second came the core stitching, the key node that bound the body together and transmitted power. It was exactly because of this structure that the monster's severed limbs could regenerate, giving it near-immortal properties. And all Klein needed to do was shatter one of those cores. And that so-called core was the only truly fatal weak point in its body. Although the core constantly moved throughout the monster's body, that meant nothing to Klein. At that moment, he charged straight toward the enormous Cyclops. Talking to him about talent only reminded Klein of the countless times in his previous life when he had slain monsters just like this, and he had long since memorized this kind of creature's weakness by heart. He could clearly sense the path of the core's movement, which was almost no different from the flow of blood. One sword strike is enough. A fierce violet flash instantly tore across the battlefield. The blade cut with perfect precision straight toward the monster's core. In a single instant, Pell's head and the giant's body were severed at the same time, and the monster's core, beneath that violent flash of sword light, was completely shattered. Klein looked at Pell coldly. In your next life, learn how to make things properly. Only you would think something this ugly looks good. At that moment, his eyes were icy, his expression full of contempt, as he personally brought this battle to an end. Afterward, Klein directly dragged Pell's soul into the mindscape. At that moment, Pell raised her head and looked around, seeing countless coffins hanging in the air. Terrified, she demanded to know where this place was. Seeing that, Klein, holding a scythe, told her, "This is the netherworld after death. It seems you still don't understand your situation. But that doesn't matter, because your judgment begins now." The moment she heard those words, her body began trembling uncontrollably. In the name of Archimonde, let the judgment begin. The moment those words fell, Pell suddenly snapped back to herself. That demon of the continent, the beginning and the end of all necromancers, Archimonde. Klein raised his hand and pointed at Pell, commanding her in the name of the god of the dead to come forward. The moment she saw Klein do that, cold sweat poured from her forehead, and she simply couldn't accept the reality in front of her. But her body was already beyond her control, and she could only drift slowly toward Klein. One by one, Klein listed the sins she had committed in life, the crimes of capturing innocent people for experiments. No, how could you possibly be Archimonde? How could Archimonde, who already died, still be alive? Klein ignored her and simply continued, "From this moment on, your fate will be decided by my own hand." The moment those words fell, Pell was lifted off the ground and suspended in midair. In terror, she demanded, "What exactly do you mean by becoming a tool?" Before she could finish speaking, a black coffin suddenly slammed toward Pell. The coffin lid shut instantly, and her screams burst out with it. At that moment, Klein hovered in midair, looking down at that coffin, silently watching Pell trapped inside in despair, and said lightly, "Are you afraid of death? If you are, then rest easy." Then he swung the scythe and sealed the coffin shut. "Don't worry. We'll meet again very soon." Inside the coffin, Pell completely broke down, crying out loudly as she sank into utter terror. At that moment, she looked around and discovered that she had somehow returned to the familiar mine. She could only desperately comfort herself, believing that the Netherworld judgment just now had been nothing more than a nightmare. Looking at the scene in front of him, Dunkel was stunned. I didn't expect that with only her head left, she'd actually still be alive. Dunkel looked at Klein kneeling on the ground, then lowered his eyes to the head lying there. Could it be that after I blacked out, young master handled everything by himself? Stop standing there in a daze, Dunkel. Get ready to write. Pell, with only her head remaining, was panicking and completely unable to understand why she had become like this. At that moment, Klein bent down close to Pell. "I think by now you should have a clear understanding of your situation. The moment she heard those words, she froze and suddenly realized that this voice was incredibly familiar. Suddenly, Klein's appearance flashed through her mind, and she instantly recognized this as the very voice of Archimonde from the Netherworld Judgment. "You haven't forgotten, have you? I told you we'd meet again." Hearing that, her pupils contracted sharply. She finally understood that it had not been a dream, and that Klein really was Archimonde. Just as she was about to cry out Klein's name, Klein leaned close and signaled for her to keep quiet, then prepared to start questioning her for the key intelligence he wanted. Bit by bit, he pressed her for details about who had sent her north, how many people were involved, and the specifics of the operation. "Tell me, and I'll let you die more easily. Otherwise, what waits for you will be endless life and endless pain. And in your current state, with only a head left, you'll stay like this forever. Of course, I'm also curious to see how long you can hold out, so you're free to stay silent if you want." At that moment, Dunkel held the record book in his hands and flipped through it, checking over all the information Pell had just confessed. "Young master, I've written down all the intelligence Pell confessed. In that case, let's go. I've had more than enough of this damn place." Seeing this, Pell immediately cried out in terror and hurriedly asked, "Then what about this head of mine? And I already told you everything. You're supposed to keep your promise." Hearing that, the corner of Klein's mouth lifted slightly. "Right, I almost forgot about you. I promised I'd let you die pleasantly." Then he activated necromancy. "Don't worry, I keep my word." A faint glimmer of magic slowly drifted toward Pell's severed head lying weakly on the ground. "But first, you'll have to enjoy one full week. After all, I said I would make it very pleasant for you." At that moment, waves of cockroaches began crawling across the ground in dense swarms. "I'll let these insects eat away at your life little by little, and I guarantee it'll only take 1 week." Seeing this, Pell's eyes widened in terror. Looking at the swarm of insects rushing toward her, she completely panicked. The cockroaches crawled over Pell's face and began crazily gnawing at her flesh. Klein merely replied with a faint smile, "Thank you for becoming one more piece I can still make use of." But Pell couldn't even process Klein's words anymore, and could only go on screaming in unbearable pain as she endured this cruel torture. Pell's desperate screams echoed nonstop through the depths of the mine, while Klein and Dunkel turned and left the mining area. They returned to the Rhineland estate. Duke Rhineland sat at his desk, head lowered as he carefully read the investigation report in his hands. After reading it, he sighed that the Empire was allowing necromancers to wreak havoc in the north, while the Holy Church was deliberately pretending not to see it. "Yes, Father, everything in the report is true. The records on the undead and the missing people in the mining area are very clear, and the disturbances breaking out in different places all tie back to this matter." Hearing that, Hynek immediately rapped on the desk, ordered Keeman to mobilize troops, and instructed the person in charge to send out the letters of contact first. Then he turned to look at Klein. "Klein, you did very well this time." Klein, however, modestly shared the credit with Dunkel, because the situation had already grown complicated, and he and Dunkel had decided to keep silent about the necromancy for the time being. Of course, he also left the choice to Dunkel. As for whether this matter could ultimately stay hidden, that would depend on what Dunkel chose. At that moment, Klein saw his father bend down and take something out from the desk, signaling for him to accept it. "Originally, I planned to give this to you after you completed a few more missions, but now it seems there's no need to wait. This badge is the identity token of the Rhineland family's personal knights. From this moment on, it is officially bestowed upon you. At the same time, I will arrange for you to enter the Knight Order as a squire." Hearing that, Klein said this honor had already far exceeded his expectations. Then he accepted the badge and pinned it to his collar. Afterward, he said goodbye to his father, though he had no idea that this farewell had nearly become their last. He walked alone through the estate corridors. In his heart, he couldn't help sighing that he had actually become a squire. And that bastard was definitely still suspicious of him right now, probably already itching to purify him again. But from now on, it might not be so easy for the other side to get to him anymore. And from the day he killed Dalton, Klein had already sworn to lead the Rhineland family back to its former glory. At that moment, Klein was planning his next move when Erin suddenly came running up from behind. She threw herself straight into Klein's arms. "Young master, I missed you so much." Klein had only one thought left in his head. "It's over. My spine is broken. The great mission of reviving this family is going to end before it even starts." Just as he irritably told Erin to go find something to eat in the kitchen. "Oh right, young master, Father Garrison has already arrived at the estate." The moment he heard that, Klein stopped dead in his tracks. "Oh no, that perverted bastard is here." Memories instantly came flooding back. The lunatic who crushed a necromancer's head with one hand, and runs around every day carrying purification water while shouting that he's going to purify me. Suddenly, Garrison spoke from behind Klein. "Young master, did your mission go smoothly?" At that instant, Klein's whole body stiffened. "It's been a long time, young Master Klein. Why don't you look happy to see me at all?" Even though Klein was cursing him out in his heart, he still answered in a low voice. There was an emergency on the church's side before, so I never got the chance to have a proper talk with you. But when I went there, an old friend gave me something rather interesting. The moment Klein saw the container clearly, his heart sank. That thing could detect the necromantic energy on his body. At that moment, Garrison brought up the time Klein had been attacked. Young Master Klein, I remember that necromancer had already been dealt with by me back then. But this container detected more than one necromancer's aura at the scene. So, young Master Klein, can you explain that to me? Garrison's tone still sounded calm, but Klein could clearly hear the violent pounding of his own heart. In the past, Klein had faced countless powerful experts and monsters, but only now, standing in front of Garrison, were his instincts screaming at him in madness, desperately warning him. At that moment, Klein calculated frantically in his mind, fully aware that his combat experience was still lacking, and that trying to replicate the other man's moves simply would not work. Seeing his reaction, Garrison's expression turned icy. The current you is no match for me at all. But for old time's sake, I can give you one chance, and besides, you've only just started training. But if what you're using is that primitive necromancy that controls souls, then today, you die. Memories flashed by in an instant, all of them scenes of people hating him, everyone screaming that Klein, that Archimonde, deserved to die. Once his thoughts settled, Klein forcibly suppressed his emotions. You bastard, you used the excuse of purification just to waterboard me. But that's actually funny. Someone I used to know said the same kind of grand nonsense. That person also talked about the future of children, about how young lives held infinite possibilities. But is this what you call justice? I know you're not doing this just because you hate me. The old me really was a failure, and that's why I died the way I did. But now, are you trying to force me into using necromancy so you can execute me on the spot? Then you're wrong. Starting today, I'm done running. My fate will be decided by me alone. Suddenly, Garrison turned his back to Klein and fell silent for a moment. He let go of the cross-shaped container filled with liquid, turned around, clenched his fist, and charged straight at Klein. Seeing this, Klein's mind started racing at top speed. The distance between them closed in an instant, and he had only one thought left. One chance is enough. I absolutely cannot hesitate this time. Klein focused completely on Garrison as he came straight at him. With his concentration pushed to the limit, the copying ability activated instantly. A punch came crashing down, and Klein was sent flying on the spot. Garrison paused, and a hint of surprise flashed through his eyes. Clearly, he hadn't expected Klein not to dodge at all. But inside, Klein was overjoyed, because he had succeeded. As the cross-shaped container smashed heavily to the ground and shattered, the surrounding servants immediately cried out in alarm, all of them having witnessed that clash just now. The servants were in full panic, completely unable to understand why the priest had suddenly attacked young Master Klein. And seizing that brief instant while the other side was distracted, Klein judged that this was the moment to counterattack. But the moment he looked up, he saw that Garrison was already holding a longsword, and asking Klein whether he was looking for this. Seeing his own empty scabbard, Klein was startled. Garrison had already taken his sword. Garrison slammed the blade hard into the ground. I truly didn't expect a necromancer to know swordsmanship. But in my eyes, you don't need to rely on some external thing like a sword at all. A fierce gust from his punch came straight at him. Klein curled his lips into a cold smile and met the attack head-on. Suddenly, a surge of power exploded with a roar, and a massive shockwave spread in every direction. After the impact, the walls of the entire building shattered instantly, and chunks of stone flew everywhere. The explosion sent clouds of dust into the air, and the nearby servants fled in panic, throwing the whole scene into chaos. Amid the dust, Klein couldn't help coughing again and again. At that moment, Garrison slowly tightened his fist and turned his cold gaze toward Klein. Duke Rhineland stood in front of Klein with his sword raised. Garrison, you'd better give me a reasonable explanation, or I can't guarantee you'll leave here alive today. But Garrison remained full of killing intent and even declared that he would kill Klein on the spot today. The moment those words fell, the knights heard the commotion and immediately stepped forward to protect both the Duke and Klein. The instant Dunkel saw who it was, his heart sank hard, and cold sweat instantly broke out across his forehead. With the Duke and the knights blocking his path, the Duke sternly asked, Garrison, do you really think you can kill Klein today? Garrison didn't answer the Duke's question, and instead said directly, once he uses necromancy, the consequences will be catastrophic. The Duke calmly replied, outside the Holy Kingdom, nowhere on this continent is necromancy forbidden by law. At that, Garrison's expression darkened, and he demanded to know whether the Duke understood what necromancy would bring upon Klein. That doesn't matter. Klein has already suffered for 7 years because of rumors. I will not allow the same thing to happen again. And I will never let you touch my son again, Garrison, unless you want to make an enemy of the entire Rhineland family. At that moment, Garrison began reciting scripture under his breath. the dense killing intent around him was no longer hidden in the slightest. A huge burst of energy erupted from his body. In the next second, he shifted to reciting the laws of the church, swearing to judge Klein as a heretic. In those eyes, there was nothing left but the resolve to sentence a heretic. Seeing this, all the knights stepped forward to block him. And as Duncan watched the scene in front of him, his heart was full of shock. Suddenly, power gathered around Garrison, and golden light surged wildly like blazing fire. The Duke leveled his sword straight ahead and gave Garrison one final warning to lower his fist. But Garrison had no intention of stopping, and even declared that this was judgment delivered by the gods. At that moment, the ground burst apart with a roar, and Garrison leapt up violently. Seeing this, the Duke's expression tightened instantly as well. He raised his hand and slashed out a fierce sword light wrapped in crimson currents. Meanwhile, Garrison used the force of his momentum to rise into the air. Holy light condensed into an incredibly heavy fist mark, carrying overwhelming force as it crashed straight down at the Duke. That punch slammed brutally into the wall, and the walls of the entire estate instantly collapsed and shattered. At that moment, he directly unleashed his personal killing move, the Fist of Judgment. Watching the two of them clash so fiercely, Klein felt his heart tighten to the limit, his mind full of worry for the Duke's safety. Just then, killing intent flared in the Duke's eyes. Activating the secret sword art of the Rhineland family, he directly unleashed the second form of the Meteor Sword. The two ultimate techniques collided head-on, erupting into a blinding burst of light on the spot. Terrifying energy exploded instantly, and even Dunkel was forced back again and again by the shockwave. Watching this life-and-death battle, Klein could only feel that the entire situation had spun completely out of control and become a total nightmare. Suddenly, Erin ran straight into the battlefield. She begged both of them to stop fighting. The Duke and Garrison both turned their heads, and both were startled when they saw Erin rush in. And when Duncan saw Erin, his expression stiffened too. At that moment, he hurried over at once and urgently told Erin to leave, because it was far too dangerous here. But Erin ignored him completely and simply stretched out her hand. "Father Garrison, you promised me that when you came back, you'd bring me a present." That scene left everyone there stunned. No one had expected Erin to ask for a gift in the middle of a life-and-death standoff. At that moment, Erin still refused to let Garrison off, stubbornly insisting that he had promised her a gift. Looking at Erin, who had absolutely no sense of the mood around her, Klein could only feel that, in a certain sense, this was a kind of talent too. Seeing that, Garrison let out a helpless sigh and admitted that he really had promised her. Then he took out some cookies from that famous bakery on Royal 3rd Avenue. After taking the cookies, Erin tried a small bite, and a look of pure satisfaction immediately appeared on her face. As she ate, she kept praising how delicious they were. Then she looked up at Garrison. "Father, was there anything you liked to eat when you were?" At that moment, Garrison slowly began speaking about the past. "When I was little, I lived in desperate circumstances, and even having enough to eat was a luxury, and the source of all of it was the Archimonde cult." Hearing the name Archimonde cult, Klein froze for a moment. "I even founded a cult like that? Why don't I remember that at all?" Garrison's eyes were filled with hatred so deep it couldn't be dissolved, and he even swore that he would destroy that cult at any cost. At that moment, he turned to Erin, and his tone became unusually gentle as he softly called her name. He told Erin to enjoy her snack, because this was the only compensation he could give her now. At the same time, he looked at Klein again. "Next time, you won't be this lucky." After saying that, Garrison turned and slowly walked out of the hall alone. As this standoff, stretched to the absolute limit, finally came to an end, Klein collapsed straight to the ground. "Damn, I almost really died just now. From now on, I absolutely do not want to face someone at Garrison's level head-on ever again." Klein knew very well that the next time Garrison spoke of would be the day he came for Klein's life. From now on, the two of them would remain enemies until one of them died. Suddenly, Erin walked over and offered him a snack, startling Klein so badly that he flinched. At that moment, Klein directly told her to go find the cook and make a whole strawberry cake, and the entire cake would belong to her. The moment she heard that, Erin instantly ran off in delight. Watching her cheerful figure disappear into the distance, the heavy sense of life and death tension from just now faded quite a bit. But Klein quickly snapped back to reality, because another hurdle was already waiting right in front of him. At that moment, the Duke proposed having a private talk with Klein. He got straight to the point. "Klein, have you been practicing necromancy? That kind of magic trapped you for 7 whole years, so why are you still choosing to touch it again?" Faced with his father's questioning, Klein frankly admitted that this knowledge came from the books in his mother's annex. Afterward, the two of them entered the study together, where they began an in-depth discussion about necromancy. When the Duke heard the name Claire, his gaze shifted slightly. At the same time, Klein also admitted openly that he had no intention of hiding this matter, and that necromancy was his only means of survival. But the Duke was deeply puzzled. Swordsmanship could have become another path for you too. Before his father could finish, Klein directly rejected the idea. You should already have read the reports Dunkel has been submitting recently. There is no magical power at all inside my body. With swordsmanship alone, I could never handle those dangerous situations. The Empire has long been secretly using necromancers to infiltrate the North. And before everything spirals completely out of control, you need to acknowledge my existence. And let me become the necromancer bound exclusively to the Rhineland family. If you believe I am not Archimonde reincarnated, then borrow my power and preserve this family. Hearing that, the Duke stayed silent for a very long time. In his mind, he recalled what Klein had looked like when he first returned to the ducal estate. Even after being trapped in the penitentiary for 7 full years, when Klein saw him, there had not been the slightest trace of resentment. As the memories flooded back, he remembered the day Klein came home and softly said, "Father, I'm back," as if nearly all of his grievance had been buried inside that one sentence. A sharp pain pierced Duke Heinkel's heart, and he finally admitted that he truly had been an incompetent father. At that moment, he turned his back, and his tone finally softened. As things stood now, he no longer had the standing or the reason to keep stopping Klein from making his own choice. He turned his head to look at Klein, and with one short sentence, gave his consent. "Klein, go do what you want to do." At that moment, in the broad hall, father and son quietly faced each other, and the wall that had long stood between them finally dissolved in silence. 1 week after that great battle in the ducal house, Aaron came over carrying a huge stack of books. Seeing that, Klein showed a trace of surprise and couldn't understand why the maid had suddenly brought so many books. When Aaron saw Klein, she widened her eyes and stayed quiet for a long while. Then muttered softly, "I heard the other maids talking about novels, and they said someone as handsome as young master would definitely have lots of women clinging to him." Hearing that, Klein gently reassured her, "If you want to read romance novels, I can read them to you. But I'm going to be very busy for a while." During the past week, that battle had nearly destroyed several parts of the estate. The repairs had taken a long time, and if not for Aaron back then, Klein might really have died. However, it was precisely because that conflict had been so dangerous that he gained something quite valuable from it. At that moment, Dunkel brought over a large batch of medical and anatomy books, which made Klein involuntarily recall how, back when he was still Archimonde, he had once served others like a dog in the Mage Tower just to learn a single spell formula. He had even racked his brain to come up with every possible method just to obtain one torn fragment from a magic book. Back then, he had even stolen books before, only to get caught on the spot and nearly have his fingers blown to pieces. In the past, only mages and noble children had the right to access this kind of scholarly text. But now, after being reborn, Klein had the best possible chance to easily obtain every kind of knowledge. It seemed the old theory claiming a connection between blood vessels and magical circulation did not hold up. In the past 200 years, countless entirely new magical theories had been born, and for the first time since his rebirth, Klein felt genuinely excited. So right then and there, he decided to master every single one of those books. At that moment, Klein caught sight of a special ancient book on the table. It was a text related to Rudel Rhineland. Dunkel, full of confusion, asked Klein why he was gathering so many anatomy books. Klein then raised his hand and produced a magic circle diagram, carefully sprinkling powder onto the center of the pattern. Then he infused the circle with his own magic. Right after that, he raised his hand and cast Necromancy, while explaining the principles behind this special necromantic art. Seeing this, Aaron was amazed, and Klein took the chance to explain. Ordinary souls usually can only become spirit bodies. Most souls have very weak magical power and self-awareness. Their body structures are simple, but durable enough. They can follow tactical commands like an army and carry out both offense and defense. But once they face a truly powerful opponent, their odds of winning become extremely low. That's also why I had to deal with Dalton personally back then. At that moment, Dunkel asked about stronger souls. If it were the soul of a knight with immense magical power, what would it become? Suddenly, it was as if Dunkel had seen right through Klein's plan all at once. Klein then spoke to reassure everyone, saying frankly, "I have no intention of creating a high-tier spirit body right now. After all, top-level souls are far too rare, and there's no need to rush to find one yet." At that moment, the butler came to report, "The Pauverne family has sent an urgent invitation. They said the matter is extremely urgent." Hearing that, Klein immediately thought of Leia, the woman who had once pinned him against the wall. Suddenly, Dunkel was a little puzzled as to why the invitation had been addressed to Klein rather than the Duke. The butler then told everyone, this urgent letter was personally delivered by Lady Hellion, and Hellion was the Duke's own younger sister. Hearing that, Klein immediately decided to go. Looking at the spirit body formation on the table, Klein couldn't help remarking that this invitation had come at the perfect time. Originally, he had no plan to create a high-tier spirit body so soon, but now the opportunity had delivered itself right to him. Late that night, Klein passed by the maid's room and heard Erin talking in her sleep. Even in her dreams, she was mumbling about cookies, leaving him speechless. The life of a foodie really is absurdly simple. Under the bright moon, Klein set out into the night, heading for the Polyvern estate. Ancient records stated that Rudolf Rhineland had been the 6th Duke of the Rhineland family. At that moment, Klein tightened his grip on the oil lamp in his hand and made up his mind that he would absolutely make that soul his own. When he reached the great doors of the majestic mausoleum, stone-armored guards stood silently on both sides. He raised his hand and pushed open the heavy stone door. Klein stood quietly at the entrance, taking in everything before him. It seemed that most of the souls in this tomb had long since reincarnated and moved on. Only a single remnant soul still remained. That soul, bound by lingering obsession, was quietly entrenched inside Rudolf's stone coffin. And Klein couldn't help thinking that he really had no idea how Heinkel would react once he learned about this. "We've never met, but for the greater cause, grandfather, you'll have to make a sacrifice. Now then, let's begin." After saying that, Klein softly began chanting in the language of the dead. Klein spoke to that unfortunate soul bound by the karma of life. "In the name of the guide, I will light the road before you. If you are willing to walk that road, then form a contract with me." At that very instant, blue spirit flames slowly ignited throughout the tomb chamber. Then moonlight spread across the entire mausoleum. A blue spirit flame appeared behind Klein, instantly draining every last bit of magic from his body. The title of strongest knight on the continent had truly not been an empty one. This was the top-tier undead creation, and there were only 2 possible ways to form a contract with it. Trying to take it by force was doomed to fail. That left only the second method, obtaining the soul's willing recognition and cooperation. Suddenly, Rudolf's voice rang out. "At first, I was curious why my adorable grandson had come to see me, but I didn't expect that the one who came would actually be Rhineland's lifelong enemy. And one who has even occupied the bloodline body of the Rhineland's family. Souls can see through essence. There's no hiding my identity, and I already made the contract terms clear. This is not a bad offer. I admit your proposal does have value, but I am a former Duke of Rhineland. I cannot easily trust the sworn enemy of my family." The moment those words fell, the spirit flame surged violently, and Rudolf suddenly launched a surprise attack on Klein. Klein proposed proving through strength that the contract held no deception, and promised to sever the obsession tying him to reincarnation. And for a knight, trust could only ever be determined by the sword. And so the battle of defiance began, and under the moonlit night, Klein clashed head-on with his grandfather's knightly soul. Klein had already made an agreement with his grandfather's undead that he would conquer him with the sword in his hand. He had already predicted this, because the moment his grandfather's attack came down, Klein countered by drawing his blade and slashing backhanded. The instant the blades collided, blue-violet force erupted violently, and the battle heated up at once. But relying on his overwhelming strength, Rudolf actually kept pressing forward even after taking the blow head-on. Seeing that, Klein was inwardly startled, completely not expecting that as a necromancer, his own swordsmanship would still be considered this strong. But Klein had long since seen through the flaws hidden inside Rudolf's moves. What remained now was nothing more than the shifting combinations of actual combat. Rudolf thought this move was already enough, but he had no idea Klein was still holding back. In Klein's eyes, Rudolf at that moment was full of fatal openings. Scenes of battles from the past flashed through Klein's mind, and on the spot he reproduced a move from those years. After leaping into the air, he moved to circle behind Rudolf and forcibly suppress him. But Rudolf was far too fast, and with a single turn he slashed out, sending their 2 weapons crashing together in midair. After taking that blow head-on, Klein dropped to one knee and had to brace himself with the long sword against the ground just to barely steady his body. Seeing him like this, even Rudolf couldn't help exclaiming, "A body with absolutely no magical power can still withstand all my attacks." At that moment, Klein lowered his head and gripped his sword. His body was covered in wounds, yet he still stood firm. After a brief silence, Rudolf said, "You really do have some skill, as expected of someone wearing the bloodline of the Rhineland family." And facing this man who had once been the strongest knight on the continent, Duke Rudolf Rhineland, Klein knew better than anyone that the source of his overwhelming fame lay in that one unrivaled swordsmanship. At that moment, Rudolf suddenly asked Klein, "Is it really amusing to pretend to be Heinkel's son?" Hearing that, Klein answered indifferently, "Heinkel never saw through the truth at all. Just like you, his instincts aren't that sharp." At that, Rudolf actually laughed. "So you really are still one of the Rhineland family, only unfortunately, not in soul. But now, saying any of this is already meaningless. From this moment on, I'll use my full strength. If you can defeat me, I'll agree to your refinement." Hearing that, Klein's pupils shrank instantly, and he recognized it at once as the tragic sword art created by Rudolf himself, then abandoned by later generations for being too complex. At that very instant, the currents in the night sky began to churn. The sword path split into countless branches in an instant, illusion and reality woven together so completely that it was impossible to tell which was the true strike. But Klein knew very clearly that among those countless sword paths, only one was real. He stared fixedly at the other man's movements, not the sword, focusing only on predicting the attack and preparing to block it in advance. At that moment, Klein judged that the attack would come from the right in a horizontal slash, and immediately sidestepped to avoid it. Right after that, he predicted Rudol's next move would follow with a horizontal slash from the left. But in the very next second, Rudol suddenly launched an aerial surprise attack, and only then did Klein realize his prediction had been wrong. His judgment of the attack route had been wrong from the start. In that critical moment, Klein could only leap sharply backward. After landing, he finally realized that the first strike had merely been a feint, deliberately used by the other side to mislead him. And what was truly dangerous next was that chain of consecutive attacks with absolutely no pattern to read. In the very next instant, he pushed his senses to the limit, raised his sword to meet the attack, and the two blades crashed together with a bang. That terrifying impact sent Klein flying outright, and he slammed heavily into the ground. At that moment, his whole body throbbed with pain, and he finally truly witnessed the terrifying nature of this phantom sword art. Young one, do not underestimate the power of northern swordsmanship. This is an ability even your father could not learn. So even if you are the greatest necromancer on the continent, you still cannot get past it. And Klein had never expected to be pushed into such a miserable state this quickly. In that case, from now on, I won't hold back anymore either. Because I've already seen through your sword style, and I've already learned it. To me, this is not some incomprehensible sword art at all. Hearing that, Rudolph's anger flared instantly, and he directly rebuked Klein for being too arrogant. Under the night sky, the tall grass swayed wildly in the wind as the two of them once again opened up distance across the open field. In the next instant, Rudolph burst forward and charged at Klein with all his might. At the same time, Klein unleashed the phantom sword in perfect sync. The two phantom swords collided head-on. You're a necromancer. What right do you have to protect the kin of your enemies? What right do you have to keep sheltering them? At that very moment, the blade was already pressed to Klein's forehead, and blood slowly trickled down the bridge of his nose. Speak, Archimonde. Why are you doing this? And why didn't you dodge that strike just now? Because of honor, and because of conviction. In the past, as a necromancer, I never understood why knights clung so stubbornly to those creeds. I always thought those things were ridiculous. But I met someone who endured the same pain I did, yet chose a completely different path in order to protect a child. Now, I simply want to see with my own eyes what the future that knight spoke of actually looks like. Hearing that, Rudolph said, though I am merely an undead spirit left behind by obsession and regret, you truly are remarkable. Perhaps the answer that will untie my obsession really does lie in that future you speak of. Now, I, Rudolph Rhineland, am willing to form an equal contract with you. Seeing that, Klein fell silent for a moment. A faint smile slowly appeared on his face. Klein then replied, helping you resolve your lingering obsession is exactly what I, as a necromancer, should do. Next, we will form a mutual and equal contract. Please follow me and recite the incantation. As the magic circle lit up, Rudolph recited the opening of the contract. I entrust my obsessions and wishes to Archimonde, the guide. Klein then continued, I accept all of Rudolph's emotions and final wishes. And I vow to light the road ahead for him until those wishes are truly fulfilled. As the contract incantation came to an end, Rudolph declared that he would become the blade in Klein's hand. After the transformation was complete, the Death Knight wore heavy black armor, crimson ghost fire burning in his eyes, and in a low voice asked Klein whether he could truly bear all the consequences this power would bring. Hearing that, Klein only smiled faintly in reply. You are free to act and not bound. The dead don't need to worry too much about the living. And so, the Death Knight contract of Rudolph Rhineland, the 6th Duke, was officially complete. The scene shifted. Klein was sprawled across the bed, utterly exhausted. Aaron came running over to tell him, everything for the trip to Polyverant's place has already been prepared. If you're going to call me, then call me. Why are you hitting me so hard? 3 days earlier, because of the side effects, Klein had nearly drained every bit of magic in his body. Now that he thought about it, he needed to recover as much strength as possible before going to the Polyvern house. For the past 3 days, Aaron had felt that something about Klein was very off and kept pestering him with questions. In response, he could only make up random excuses to brush her off. But Aaron said, ever since you came back late that night, you've been acting weird, and that alone is already suspicious. And on this paper, the only part you circled just happens to be the section about undead knights. Seeing that, Klein's heart instantly tightened, and he quickly told her to put the book back first. So, young master, tell me honestly, is this what you went off to do behind my back in Dunkel's? The moment he heard that, Dunkel suddenly called out to Klein, young Master Klein. At the sound of his voice, Klein whipped his head around and instantly broke into a cold sweat. terrified that Dunkel had heard the whole conversation just now. Seeing Duncan's calm expression only made Klein panic even more, worried that his secret would come out early and cause even more trouble. The moment he imagined that madman Garrison finding out about this, Klein felt his scalp go numb. He had just been about to explain, when Dunkel raised a hand and placed it on Klein's shoulder. "Young Master Klein, you really don't need to feel ashamed about this kind of thing." As Dunkel's hand withdrew, Klein first let out a breath of relief. But in the very next second, he froze again. What exactly did he mean by this kind of thing? At that moment, Dunkel crouched down slightly, leaned toward Aaron, and gestured for her to listen carefully to what he was about to say. "Young Master is currently going through a very important stage. From now on, this sort of thing will happen often. Young men in puberty are naturally full of energy. This is completely normal." After hearing Dunkel's explanation, Klein was completely dumbfounded. He had never expected him to take it in that direction at all. And just as Klein was about to correct this outrageous misunderstanding, Dunkel stepped in first to say that everything was perfectly normal. And besides, this is something every boy goes through at this age. Even doing it secretly is fine. At that, Klein's face turned red, and he immediately protested in agitation, desperately denying that it was the kind of thing Dunkel thought it was. "Damn it, get back here. Klein hasn't even finished talking, and you're already trying to leave again?" Hearing that, Dunkel said in a serious tone that he was preparing to report this matter to the Duke. After all, from a Guardian Knight's point of view, this counts as good news worth reporting. At that point, Klein felt like his whole mind had split in half. "Please, could your thinking be any more outrageous? This is too much." As Dunkel finished speaking and took his leave, Klein truly regretted not turning Dunkel into an undead knight back then too. In the next instant, Klein hurried after him, shoved the door open, and shouted for Dunkel to come back, even though he was already far away. But the moment the door swung open, Klein walked straight into the woman who had once pinned him to the wall, Leia. And the moment she spoke, she made it clear that this time, she had come specifically to pick him up. Hearing that, Klein's heart tightened, and he secretly guessed that Leia might have overheard what they were just talking about. Seeing his expression, Leia directly stated that she had absolutely no interest in Klein's private matters. Then she urged him to hurry up and leave, since the Grand Duchess was still waiting for him. Just as Klein was thinking about how to deal with this meeting, Leia had already plopped herself into the carriage. In response, Klein suggested they take separate carriages, but she shut that down immediately. Leia's attitude was firm, and she directly decided that the two of them would ride in the same carriage. The moment he heard that, Klein instantly felt that something was off. "Last time she pinned me against the wall and I almost lost my first kiss. What is she trying to do this time?" Looking at the way she sat there with her arms folded, Klein had only one thought left. Well, damn. One of the three great Dragon Slayer bloodlines on the continent, the Palvern family. After the death of the former Duke, the family's power split into two opposing factions. One was the Grand Duchess faction led by Helene of the Rhineland family. The other conservative faction was controlled by the eldest daughter, Leia, commander of the Blue Holy Spear Knights. At that moment, Leia sat there with her arms crossed and a blank expression, ordering Klein to take off his clothes immediately. Hearing that, Klein sat stiffly across from her, rubbing his hands again and again, completely unable to understand what this woman wanted now. As the carriage rolled along the mountain road through the woods, Klein inwardly ranted about the string of bizarre events he had run into today. What the hell? Sure, I'm a little worked up right now, but how did I end up thinking about a scene like that from before? Suddenly, she asked Klein whether he knew about the strange incidents that had been happening recently outside Rhineland territory. In response, Klein looked at her in confusion. Recently, quite a few commoners in different places have suddenly lost control and gone berserk. Some of them could even lift heavy objects with their bare hands that several grown men together couldn't move. Hearing that, Klein was even more confused. At most, going berserk just sounded like some kind of new magic. So what did that have to do with taking off clothes? At that moment, she changed the subject and bluntly said that Klein's hands did not look like a knight's at all, yet he had defeated an Empire knight with swordsmanship. And she suspected that Klein also possessed the same abnormal strength as those berserkers, because swollen veins would appear on their bodies too. So she wanted Klein to take off his clothes so she could check whether he showed the same signs. At that point, Klein completely understood. This woman is trying to take advantage of me. So he immediately told Leia, people can change completely over time. And something like swordsmanship can improve by leaps and bounds in a short span too. Even right now, while you and I are talking, my thoughts are changing. Klein took the opportunity to bring up the wager from the duel and asked whether what she had promised after he won still counted. The moment she heard that, Leia instantly panicked a little, clearly remembering the kiss she had once promised. In the very next second, she hurriedly urged Klein to take off his clothes at once. I can take mine off, but if I do, then we both do. Right now, I also suspect that you're one of those berserkers. In an instant, the atmosphere inside the carriage froze completely. Klein and Leia stared at each other in silence, neither making the first move. Then Leia broke the silence and told Klein to listen carefully to every word she was about to say. This time, I came under the Grand Duchess's orders. I have no selfish motives at all. But before we return to the estate, I have to clear up my suspicions about you. And if it turns out I was wrong, then I will apologize to you, and I will take full responsibility for what I'm doing right now. After hearing her guarantee, and after a brief silence, Klein already understood that today's situation was really about to spiral out of control. In that case, he was actually a little curious whether she would really keep the promise she had just made afterward. At the same time, they finally arrived at the magnificent Palaverne Manor. Standing to one side, Klein sized up the estate before him. At a glance, it looked at least 3 times larger than his own family's manor. At the same time, he couldn't help marveling inwardly that the presence and scale of this estate were almost on par with a royal palace. It was hard to imagine just how much hidden power the Palaverne family still possessed. Just as Klein was still taking it all in, the butler softly called out to him. The balding butler bowed and introduced himself as Gordon, chief steward of the Palaverne ducal house. In response, Klein politely returned the gesture and gave his own name as well. Butler Gordon raised a hand in invitation. "Please, come inside the estate and wait first." Afterward, Klein and Aaron followed the butler through the hall. As he led the way, the butler said, "It has been a very long time since anyone from the Rhineland family stepped into this Palaverne estate." Hearing those words, Klein immediately made a judgment in his heart. Since the butler was a confidant of the former duke, he should not have revealed that kind of information to an outsider. That meant the other side had most likely already started seeing him as someone worth working with. Just then, the corridor filled with shifting light and shadow as Hellion, leader of the family's branch faction, slowly walked toward Klein. Within the sea of his consciousness, Klein told his grandfather why he had awakened him. It was because the next person he was about to meet was Rudolph's daughter. And this woman might very well become Klein's enemy, or even the enemy of the entire Rhineland family. Heinkel's sister was the very woman who had married into the Palaverne family, one of the Empire's 3 grand ducal houses. And the beginning of the Rhineland family's decline had also started with her alliance with the Empire. At that moment, she looked at him calmly. "Klein, come here." At that summons, everyone present understood that the person before them was now the Rhineland's family's exclusive necromancer, Klein. Hearing this, Aaron softly asked from the side, "Young master, then what should I do?" Klein told her to go get herself some snacks first, even though he knew she would probably wipe them all out. It didn't matter. After all, kids were still growing. At that moment, a banquet had already been prepared inside the Palaverne estate. Klein bowed first and said, "It's been a long time, Aunt Helene." Seeing that, she motioned for Klein to sit, while Hector beside her kept a cold expression the entire time. This man was the heir of the Palaverne family, Hector Ross. He was Helene's son, and he was clearly extremely displeased by Klein's arrival. Suddenly, Klein heard someone call him Archimond. That single word made him freeze for a moment. Seeing that Klein hadn't responded, Helene said, "If there is anything making you uncomfortable, tell me at any time." Looking at the heavily guarded knights all around him, Klein felt nothing but helplessness inside. Every single person here looked ready to draw their sword at any moment. "No matter what, seeing you still reminds me of many things from the past, especially those eyes. You really do look far too much like your late mother, Claire." Klein replied calmly, "My mother died too early. I barely remember her at all. But if you're only trying to win my favor this way, then you may as well change the subject. That would be more direct." At that moment, Helene lightly pressed a hand against the table and said she simply wanted to give Klein a chance to choose. A chance to leave Rhineland and submit to her instead. "Your achievements are impressive, Klein. You once defeated an imperial knight by yourself, even forcing the arrogant Count Conwell to bow his head. But today's Rhineland has long since fractured and decayed, and that is exactly why I led the Palaverne family to align with the Empire. Because the age of surviving on nothing but a family name is already over. So, are you willing to become someone who bows to the Empire and obeys its will?" Faced with Klein's angry rebuke, she didn't care in the slightest and simply continued. "So-called ducal houses are nothing before imperial power, like a single drop of water falling into a river. But once that drop joins the river, it does not simply disappear. Sometimes, by borrowing the river's force, it can change the entire current. So that's your plan, Aunt Helene. So join me. I will give you something enough to make your choice. For example, time, which everyone needs. Even demon kings and heroes are eventually ground down by time. And I possess a portion of the power of time. If you are willing, I can share it with you at any moment." Hearing that, Klein's heart jolted, yet looking at her calm expression, she didn't seem to be bluffing at all. But in the next second, he suddenly changed the subject and said calmly, "I can't really explain why I insist on protecting Rhineland. But there is one thing I know very clearly. When someone casually destroys something that belongs to you, it feels terrible, like this glass of wine. Seeing this, Holian's heart sank. Clearly, she had not expected Klein to do something like that on the spot. And my things are mine alone to destroy. What's more, I still haven't seen with my own eyes the future Belker spoke of. At this, Holian's expression gradually darkened as well. No one has ever dared refuse my invitation. Hearing that, Klein merely said lightly, then you'll be seeing a lot of firsts in the future, especially with me. At that moment, Hector suddenly rose from his seat. He walked to the opposite side of the dining table, and the atmosphere instantly turned tense. Their eyes met directly, both filled with undisguised hostility and killing intent. Then he drew his sword and pointed it straight at Klein. I'll give you one chance. Kneel now and apologize to my mother, and I can temporarily overlook your insolence. I didn't expect Aunt's son to be this good at guarding his master. Hearing that, Hector immediately concluded that someone of Klein's background was fundamentally unworthy of understanding loyalty. Suddenly, he actually took Klein's loss of his mother in childhood and used it to humiliate him in public, his words dripping with malice. But the instant he finished speaking, the plate suddenly slid with a harsh screech. That scene made Hector's expression freeze on the spot. When elders are speaking, don't interrupt. If your mother never taught you that, I don't mind teaching you myself. At that moment, the atmosphere in the hall tightened to the extreme. Suddenly, Hector sneered and mocked Klein for looking younger and being completely unworthy of calling himself an elder. And you still dare talk back? At that moment, Helion finally spoke and sharply ordered Hector to stop. But although Hector forcibly suppressed his anger and apologized to his mother, this bastard insulted the Duchess. So today, I have to cripple one of his hands. The instant Hector slashed down with his sword, Klein leaped up and dodged it directly. Immediately after, Hector grabbed several pieces of tableware and hurled them violently at Klein. Without the slightest hesitation, Klein instantly drew the longsword at his waist and knocked away every piece of metal flying toward him. In the next second, Hector leaped in close and brought his sword down heavily. The tremendous recoil made Hector's entire arm go numb. As Hector kept pressing with a sweeping slash, the blade nearly grazed Klein's forehead. Immediately after that, Klein twisted sideways and smoothly circled to Hector's flank, forcibly closing the distance. After only a brief exchange, Klein had already reached his judgment. Hector's swordsmanship is decent, but that's all. He's too weak. In the next second, Klein raised his hand at close range and instantly locked onto Hector's throat. Then he slammed Hector hard against the tabletop. Standing over Hector, Klein muttered in a low voice, "There is one thing Anne wasn't wrong about. To me, time really is more precious than life. Because I slept for far too long, and only now have I finally awakened, so I cannot waste even a single minute or second. But I truly can't understand why I should waste such precious time on vermin like you." At that moment, Klein had even started to feel killing intent rise in his heart. Compared to wasting more time, he might as well just kill Hector outright. Suddenly, the Knight Sanchez stepped forward from behind and raised a hand to stop the conflict. "This is the Duchess's residence, so return to your seat at once." Sanchez put a hand on Klein's shoulder and forcibly stopped him from going any further. "This guy is strong. I didn't even feel him move, and his hand was already on my shoulder." At that moment, Hector was also calculating rapidly in his heart. If this keeps escalating, it will only drag everyone down with it. So he pulled back and steadied himself, choosing to back off with words. "Today, for my mother's sake, I'll let you off." But the hand gripping his dining knife was clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white, and the killing intent in his eyes hadn't faded at all. In the next second, he suddenly spun around and drove the dining knife straight at Klein's face. The instant the blade closed in on Klein's eye, with life and death separated by a hair, Leia suddenly rushed forward and sent Hector flying with a brutal elbow strike. That scene left everyone present stunned. No one had expected that at a moment like this, someone would suddenly step in and stop Hector. Leia then looked coldly at Klein. "I came to take responsibility for my rudeness in the carriage." Hearing that, Klein froze for a moment, his mind replaying everything that had happened in the carriage. He had never expected that she still remembered what had been said back then. At that moment, Hector turned and looked at her coldly. "Leia, you shouldn't be protecting someone who insulted my mother and my family." In response, Leia only shot back coldly. A person who draws a sword on a guest has no right to speak of family dignity. Just as the two were locked in a standoff, Helion spoke in a cold voice. "Hector, how much longer do you intend to disgrace yourself?" Hearing that, Hector's face instantly turned pale, and cold sweat soaked through him at once. Seeing this, Klein was inwardly startled. Helion's presence was overwhelming. One sentence was enough to change the entire atmosphere. At that moment, Leia lowered her head toward Helion and said, "My apologies, Grand Duchess." Helion slightly raised her eyes and replied flatly, "You should know who it is you truly ought to protect." "Yes, Grand Duchess. The duty of the Blue Holy Spear Knights is to ensure the safety of our guests." Then she turned her head and ordered the knights under her command. to complete all the preparations for tomorrow's training. Watching the scene before him, Klein finally understood that Leia was not merely the eldest daughter of the Palaveran family, but also the commander of the Blue Holy Spear Knights, the young lady of a prestigious Western house, and at the same time, a terrifying Rakshasa on the battlefield. After giving the order, she turned and left, waving a hand to dismiss everyone. The moment the door closed, she dropped all her disguises, leaned heavily against it, and let out a long breath, murmuring under her breath, "I somehow made it through today too." She was the young lady of the Palaveran family. In outsiders' eyes, she was a cold-blooded and formidable knight commander. But deep in her heart, she had always hidden a secret no one knew. She reached out and pulled a cord, and a hidden door slowly opened, revealing an entire wall covered with portraits. With a single glance, her eyes lit up, her face filled with admiration, and she softly called out, "Lord Archimonde." The wall was covered with portraits of Archimonde she had collected over the years, and every single one was hand-drawn. On the shelves were necromancer relics she had bought back from auctions, all said to have once belonged to Archimonde. There was also a circular portrait of Archimonde, along with a huge pile of biographies about him. And of course, the most precious thing of all was the life-size double-sided body pillow she had made with her own hands. At that moment, she was hugging the pillow and murmuring softly, "Your battle today was perfect. As a reward, I'll pat your head." Suddenly, she let out a light sigh. The problem was that the Archimonde drawn by those historians looked different in every picture, and even the clothes were ridiculously inconsistent. So in the end, she could only draw him herself again according to the image in her heart. Whenever she looked at that body pillow, she had the illusion that Archimonde was really smiling at her. And every time she thought of that, she got so excited she felt like she might melt from happiness. The two maids outside the door could only exchange glances as they listened to the commotion inside, since this was something they heard every day. "The whole world calls you the demon of the continent, but sometimes I truly envy you, because no matter how others cursed you, in the end you still lived as your true self. But what pains me most is that when you disappeared, I had not yet been born, and I never even had the chance to see you once." Just as she was completely sinking into her own world, a sudden shout startled her badly. Immediately, she hid the body pillow away. She absolutely could not let anyone see this love-struck side of her. "It's me, Klein. I want to talk to you." At this moment, Klein stood outside the door. Truthfully, he didn't really want to deal with this woman who kept calling him a brat, but she had helped him after all. Suddenly, Leia opened the door with a stiff expression. She stared at Klein, her thoughts racing. Ever since childhood, rumors had claimed that Klein was Archimonde's reincarnation. But she had secretly investigated him many times and had never found even a trace of necromancy on him. And on top of that, his face was actually starting to look more and more like Archimonde's. More importantly, the way he stared at his opponent during the duel was exactly like a hunter looking at prey. But like Hellion, he carried the Rylan bloodline, so she absolutely could not let her guard down around him. While she was still thinking, Aaron suddenly rushed in from the side. Before she even had time to react, Klein had already followed her inside. Standing in front of her, Klein thanked her seriously. "If you hadn't stepped in today, things would only have gotten worse. And because of that you even ended up clashing with Hellion, which must have put you in a difficult position." Hearing that, Leia froze for a moment. She had not expected Klein to come just to thank her. It seemed she had overthought it. But in the very next second, Klein changed the subject and asked whether she would be willing to make a deal with him. Before coming here, he had already learned some information from Gordon. The Grand Duke's death was far from simple and full of suspicious details, and Hellion had been the only person present before the Grand Duke died, while the will had likewise ended up in Hellion's hands. So they had a common enemy. Klein wanted her to hand over the Branch family's intelligence and resources to him, and he would think of a way to deal with Hellion. They didn't need a family alliance, just two people with a common enemy joining hands for a while. So what do you think? Either way, neither of us loses. Then Klein took a step forward. "Of course, if you have any other conditions, you can name them too." Watching this, Aaron felt that something about the atmosphere seemed strange, but for the moment she couldn't put her finger on it. Suddenly, Leia lowered her head. "So you only came to find me after hearing the news about my father? But what makes you think that just because I hate Hellion, I'd be willing to cooperate with you? In my eyes, there's no difference between you and Hellion. When you see someone else's wound, your first instinct is to calculate how much you can gain from it." Hearing that, Klein's pupils suddenly contracted. How was he the same as that old woman? Just as the atmosphere had frozen solid, Aaron suddenly called out, "Young master." Then she excitedly held up a rag doll. "Young master, look at this, it's ugly but kind of cute." The moment she saw it, Leia's mind went blank. That was the handmade doll of Lord Archimonde she had sewn herself. "Wait." Without a second's hesitation, Leia rushed over, snatched the doll back, and said, "This is very important. Don't touch it carelessly." Meanwhile, Klein stood to the side, staring at the doll thoughtfully. Suddenly, Aaron grabbed the cord to the hidden room. As the secret compartment slowly opened, the chamber inside was fully exposed. The entire wall of portraits, the bookshelves, the collectibles, all of it was revealed in the light. Seeing this, Aaron pointed at the things on the wall and asked blankly, "What even is all this?" Then she suddenly leaned in to look at one of the portraits. "Young master, this is a man's face. It's drawn pretty badly." Klein stared at those portraits, then lowered his head to look at the doll, as if he had suddenly realized something. In the next second, Klein's eyes widened abruptly, and he blurted out, "That fucking thing is me." At that moment, Aaron pulled out another life-size body pillow from the secret room. "Young master, there's also a weird pillow in here." Seeing this, Leia wished she could find a crack in the ground and crawl into it immediately. At that moment, her face was bright red, her whole body frozen stiff, and only one thought remained in her mind. "It's over. My entire secret private life is exposed, and every bit of dignity I had as a knight commander is gone." As for Klein, he exploded on the spot. "Leia, explain yourself right now. What exactly are you doing? Why are my ugly pictures everywhere? Burn all this trash." Before Klein could finish speaking, what met him head-on was an incredibly loud slap. "You hateful brat, don't you dare insult my Lord Archimonde." In an instant, Klein was completely dumbfounded. What the hell was that even supposed to mean? At that moment, thunder and lightning raged outside the window. Hector curled up on the ground, letting out pained whimpers. Hellion, eyes reddened, looked down at him. "Hector, you wretched fool, you nearly ruined my entire plan."